One of the initial steps of the military Psyop program is directed toward the hostland military establishment itself. Since the military represents the government to the populace, their actions and attitudes can do much to create a favorable image of that government in the minds of the people. A soldier's attitude goes a long way toward implementing an effective military Psyop program. Among the support elements needed are the light mobile printing team with its printing and editorial shelters. Also needed is a radio team to support existing radio stations, particularly in the back country. An audiovisual vehicle will help to increase the effectiveness of face-to-face communications. And a loudspeaker team will support tactical operations.
Hello and welcome to the show. As usual, we're just a little bit late starting, but that's always, it's always the way. You got to have a technical problem here and there. So we're talking chickens, and Dr. Judy's on the other line there, and maybe she could let you know what's happened in the last week.
Well, I just had this one hen that was supposed to be sitting on eggs, but she gets up and leaves.
Oops, sorry, that was
around.
me.
No. She gets up and runs around and leaves the eggs unattended. Or if somebody else wants to lay an egg in her nest, she gets up and leaves to let them. And then when they're done, they get up and this. She was sitting on 4 eggs. They're not all supposed to hatch at the same time. And the one's supposed to be hatching today. It looks like it's not alive anymore. So I was thinking of stealing the other one, so I put it in the incubator and I'm wondering how to get my incubator up to temperature. And then, but what is the temperature? And then, okay, where are my batteries for the thermometer thingy? And I know what it's like to have toddlers. As I have cats that you put something on the table and they get into a chase, scene, and they're chasing each other around, and who knows what goes on the floor. And then it gets onto the bed, and you got to go dig for it.
Yeah,
and
that's
was like
kind of the way it is with the toddlers. And so, yeah, you do know what it's like. It's lots of fun and games, having to move everything, having to think ahead and go, how high can those cats go? And
or how high will they go? Or they usually behave, but if they're into chasing each other, different things happen.
Yeah, their little brains kind of go into a different realm, I think, at that point.
Yep.
Do you think?
Oh, I found the batteries.
They're little cat brains. Do you found the batteries?
Yep. Yeah, they got them on the floor and they went under the bed. So.
Well, that's great. Okay, so, we've got our batteries. We've got everything's going. And so I think we're copacetic. The only thing I can't see is the chat yet. So I'm going to be checking in with the chat folk. I'm going to mute myself, and maybe you could just tell me what you were looking at in the news. We were talking about, it's kind of like toddlers. That's a good segue.
Oh, the CPS stealing kids.
Yeah.
And also whether or not you can have free-range kids anymore. Yeah. And that's a kind of a problem, because there's so much development that happens when they're free-range kids. As soon as he gets mad at Joey, and they pull each other's hair or whatever, and then they learn how to negotiate and how to deal and get along with each other. But if you don't have that, and then parents are always managing kids, how do they ever figure out how to negotiate? Playground fight type stuff. And Jordan Peterson talks about rats, how they play. And there's a big rat and a little rat, and then they like to play. Well, if the big rat doesn't let the little rat win a certain percentage of the time, the little rat doesn't want to play anymore. So then the big rat doesn't have anybody to play with. And how you can extend that to, a sense of fair play, and also, making it worthwhile. That if if one kid's always beating up another kid, that's no fun. So the kids need to learn how to negotiate that, and they're not getting to nowadays. Like, if, what I talked about with my trumpet case, it was spinning around and bop bop bop. The guys who were teasing me, and then they didn't tease me anymore because they thought they could pick at me, and I wouldn't do anything. They like to pick on the one that doesn't fight back. Well, I fought back. Okay, then they left me alone. And it's just establishing things, just like what little chicks do when they're growing up. They establish pecking orders and routines, and who they like and who they don't like. Seriously, there's one chicken that has a best friend, and then another chicken has another best friend, and then they'll hang out with that one, more than the other ones. But they just which ones they trust more. I think the same is true with people. But now we have kids being driven to school, dumped off, kept in the school, and then driven, picked up at the end of the day. There's none of this before school playground, stuff, or walking to school.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I'm hoping that the chat folk will chime in today because, it's a really hard one. Because what they've done is they've created an environment where we have to be afraid all the time. And so what's the best way to be afraid with our kids? It's the same as the gun violence thing. They're going to choose a school to shoot up so that we'll get...
Or whatever the deal is, or somebody's going to get kidnapped. And, I was telling Joni that I don't know of anybody who's had their kid kidnapped. And she said she has, but...
Michael Donahue. Yeah, it was a local thing, but it does happen quite a bit. I know my brother in Pittsburgh, they had kids kidnapped in malls and that sort of thing.
Where, a spouse, squabbles, and they're going to split up, and somebody wants to steal have custody, and they can't, and then you take the kid. That's a different category than total stranger trafficking deal.
Unfortunately, that's what's happening, and I just did a show on trafficking, and that's, I guess, the biggest problem is that there's part of it is real. So there is this fear that people have. They think they're trying to protect the kids. On the other hand, it's, I think that's why Trump is actually really, and a lot of other people too, that actually Scalise, the guy that got shot, his big thing was child trafficking. And it's a big industry because there's a lot of very horrible things that are going on in that case, and people are making a lot of money on it. So whenever you speak out about it, it seems like you become a target.
Yeah, and there's I guess it always has gone on to some degree, but it's how much it's allowed to go on, I think.
Yeah.
If you
and I agree in this snitch thing.
I remember when I was walking to school once, there's a guy that nobody knew would stop to talk with me. And he had me, step off the sidewalk, step around some bushes. And immediately, some people, I didn't know who they were, called the police.
Huh.
And like they thought that wasn't right. And maybe the guy would have kidnapped me. But the fact that you had a community that looked out. And, they immediately, this is like several blocks from where I lived. And, people in that neighborhood didn't know me, but, they thought it was kind of weird that this grown person, I thought he was like 40s, but he probably was 20s.
Right.
It had me step around behind a bush to talk with me, kind of like out of sight of others. And somebody else was watching enough to know that there's something wrong there.
Well, that's the point right there. It's not, it's this idea that they're going to report them to the Child Protective Services. That's what I really have a hard time with. It's like people want to be anonymous. They're do-gooders, but they're really just being cowards.
Right, or if you know whose kid it is, you call the parents.
Well, this is what I'm saying, because it was a neighbor, I think, in one of the
my thing was, it was out of our immediate neighborhood. It was just on the way to school. It was, several blocks away, and they didn't know who I was. But, it wasn't my fault. It wasn't my parents' fault. There's a thug that was, preying on kids and doing inappropriate things. And so, but now they're putting it on the parents to supervise their kid 24 hours a day and look over them. Like, you can't let your kid go to the park.
Yeah.
Three houses over. And you have to be within reach of the kid. So what does that do to a kid's mind? As soon as a kid get loose, it's going to really be weird.
It indoctrinates them. I mean, that's
like,
really what
remember what training
the
wheels
idea
were like
is, I
on a
think.
bike?
It's indoctrinating the next generation with that kind of fear.
Yeah, but it's worse than that. It's you know what training wheels were for on a bike? So the kid could ride a bike without the risk of falling over. And then you raise the training wheels some, so they're there to catch them just in case, until they're proud. They can proudly go without training wheels.
Well, how do you think this ties in
isn't
with?
That what, hang on, I'm throwing the analogy with with parents watching kids, and at some point you need to let the kid just have a little bit more, raise the training wheels up a little bit, and let them negotiate the world by themselves, like being able to walk to school or ride the bike to school. And with parents watching along the route, they're pretty safe, but the kid doesn't realize that, and they realize they have to be responsible. But if you have a parent shuffling them from door to door and not letting them have any responsibilities whatsoever, when the kid finally is turned loose, like going to college, they have no idea how to handle responsibility, because they never could try it out.
Yeah, so it makes me wonder if there's an agenda behind that. That's all. Because I'm likening it to the fear that's created by something like 9/11. It's all fear-based, and even advertising is fear-based, scaring.
We already see it. We already see it. Kids who are in their mid to late 20s now and younger, I see it. They're the generation that was driven to and from school. And, they weren't walking to school anymore. They were getting driven to and from school. And they didn't have after-school jobs. They didn't have, of course, we don't have paper routes much anymore, but no McDonald's work or no lawn mowing. They don't have no sense of they get an allowance, and that's it. It's just free money. It's not a sense of, oh, I want more money, so I'm gonna go mow more lawns. And so then it comes time for them to get a job, and they don't know how to do that.
It's a way of keeping us dependent. It's the old teat in the sky thing. And I do think that I can see the whole thing unfolding, because I think that's exactly what they're trying to do with it. They and the crew are trying to do with all of us. And, they always work on the next generation, just like the Hitler Youth did.
No, they have to. It's 2 generations up already, because if that's, kids in their mid-20s who've never really known how to go out on their own. Mommy, daddy's done all the bill paying for them and whatnot, and after college they come back and live at home because they're not ready to go out on their own.
Yep.
I mean, I do know a lot of kids in that category.
Well, my kids are sort of straddle both of those generations, and it's really interesting just to see the difference in those 13 years between the oldest and the youngest. It's quite fascinating to me. There's this safety factor, that's always built into everything with the younger kids. Everything is,
But it's no longer about, it used to be about how somebody raised their kid. It's no longer about that. It's about what regulations are requiring parents to do in the school system to do X, Y, and Z.
Well, I have to say it is about how you raise your kid. It's just the standards of raising your kid have changed, and you're considered to be a real monster if you do the things that our parents did, or even that I did with my kids. I was, again, on that border of, having to justify my actions, even about saying no. I remember my oldest is 42, and people were arguing with me about whether I should say no to him when he was, when he's born. And they'd say, oh, you'll change your mind once he's born.
Well, yes, a lot of kids that don't know that meaning, and there's different causes of the school shoot 'em up events, and but there's one category, I call it the amateur category, where the kid does not know how to tolerate, uh, the word no, or losing. Like everybody gets a trophy. When do
Yep.
they learn how to lose? And then they get into high school and they want to ask the prettiest girl out to the prom, and she says no. Then they go nuts.
Get out their guns.
Yeah, yeah. They just do not know how to handle the rejection.
The hardest thing for a
You know,
parent who has a sense of knowing what they want to do as far as being parents is they're fighting an uphill battle. It's interesting because I did just watch a documentary about the kids that were being indoctrinated into the Hitler Youth, and the parents were saying, "Don't let the propaganda get to you." It was really interesting because the parents knew, they got it, and the kids weren't listening, and so they were being influenced by these outside folks. They'd buy them the brown shirts, and then they would start to. It was
well, the
a
kids want
psyop program.
part of a clique. It's they want to be in with the in crowd.
Not only that, it's more insidious because these adults were saying that your parents don't know what they're talking about. So they're breaking down the relationship at a really fundamental level.
Yeah, that's what I'm kind of saying about now. It's not about how you raise your kids. It's about how the government regulates how you raise your kids, how the school system regulates it. Yeah, that's what I said earlier, that the problem is you can't do what you think is best. You no longer get to raise your own kid. You can't do something like when I was growing up, we didn't have a TV, and I felt at the time, like on Monday the kids talked about the movie they saw on TV the night before, and I felt like they got left out. But then later I got to seeing the difference. I was out doing stuff and figuring out how to do stuff, and and it was everybody in our family ended up doing things. They didn't just hang out like others.
Mm-hmm.
But nowadays you can't do that. That would be seen as call Child Protective Services to see why they're depriving their kid of TV sets.
And that's not even far off. I mean, that really is what happens. And I was going to have Stephen Shellen on because he's had this happen in his life in the 90s. And, it's horrific. And I was doing childcare, so I saw it happening as well. But it's really interesting because if you leave your kids in the car for a second while you nip into the store, not okay. You can get actually prosecuted for that.
I can see that to a degree, because what happens if you slip and fall and hurt your head? Does somebody know that your kid's in the car?
Sure, I'm with you there. That's the thing.
I have left my cat in the car, and that's the thing I fear the most is falling and then nobody knowing I have somebody needs to go let the cat out of the car.
So what's the line?
I would count to 120, to get in and out. So I can't forget. But I've done that like twice, and I felt just horrible about it. But if I slipped and fell, people wouldn't know what I was bellyaching about with a cat.
Yeah, I get that. And I'm just wondering what you think the line is, because like, I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying that, is it worth being called, like Child Protective Services being called because you leave your kids in the car?
That's another, issue there. It's with that. I'm glad I don't have to make that decision. But there's the deal with the woman who was sitting in her front yard on her lawn chair, reading a book or who knows what she was doing, while her kids were on scooters. They lived at the end of a cul-de-sac.
Mm-hmm.
And apparently a neighbor called the police and said this one wasn't attending to her kids. They're like 10, 11, 12 years old.
Yeah.
And she got arrested and put in jail overnight.
That's the part right there that is the difference. There's the busybody neighbors, always have been. And then there's the next step, which is I'm going to bypass having a relationship with my neighbor. Maybe they don't like each other already. Maybe they put up a fence. There's all sorts of things that could be going on. Yeah, and that's the retribution. You can go right to that. Well, it used to be that the police would say, go next door and talk to them. I remember
Yeah, let
that
me
there was,
introduce you to your neighbor.
yeah, they wouldn't come whipping out and just go, yeah, we're going to arrest you. They would,
Right.
maybe they would. Sorry.
Now it's seen as somebody wants to be a snitch because that makes them feel like they have a meaningful life because they did something, and they have power over somebody because they can turn them in.
My
And
point
that's
too is
like what you see in the lower socioeconomic levels. It's a way of feeling important, is being able to turn somebody in for something.
And what I'm
And
saying is who's enabling that? Because the cops are actually doing that. The authorities are doing that. They're enabling those kinds of people that have a predisposition to be narcs, as we used to call them, and to say, okay, sure, we'll come and arrest that person. I mean, that's craziness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's to not hear what one person is like. The CPS, Child Protective Services, loves to guilty until proved innocent, and they immediately take away the kids until they can study the situation.
Yes.
And in some of the cases, it's horrible what they've done. There really isn't a problem, but because they've removed the kid, what does that do to the kid in the brain? The kid wants to have some leverage in negotiating with the parents if they can stay overnight at Susie's house. Well, I'm going to tell CPS that you're abusing me if you don't let me stay at Susie's house.
Well, see, I've had a little bit of that myself, and that's the more insidious part to me, is that you've got these adults that are behaving in a certain way, and it enables kids to follow that lead. That's the part that I find.
Kids will always try to negotiate. I mean, isn't that what they do?
Or they just yell at you and tell you that you're being abusive.
For example, how many kids do you know of who have not done this? I'm going to hold my breath until you get, I can get what I want.
Mm-hmm.
I think about every kid does that, don't they? Until they see it doesn't do anything.
Yeah, this is conjuring up all sorts of things for me because I just find it to be such a bizarre world that we live in, where
right.
You've got these kids, and I'm thinking 16-year-olds, where they jump up and down and tell you how horrible you are and how you don't understand them. Right? You got the hormones.
Tools. Like what I saw. A few decades ago, where a teenage girl who's having adolescent rebellion with her mother, and like she wants birth control pills, and mother says, "You're not old enough." And, well, I'll show you. And she goes out and gets pregnant deliberately to prove something to her mom. And then her mom isn't too happy about that. So the kid realizes that now they can leave home and get a new home all of their own from the government, free. And they have no idea what the predicament they just put themselves in.
That's exactly it, and I think that's
get a free house and they can play grown up and have their
I'll give you an example out of my own life, because I have a really long-term friend, and her son was friends with my son. He showed up my door one day, and I think my son was with him, and he said he'd run away from home or something. And I said, okay, well, I just want you to call your parents. You can stay here if you want, but I just want them to know you're safe. And he huffed out of there and wasn't going to do it. And he went to somebody who was going to accommodate. And that was a long time ago. Kids will do this. And, if you set boundaries, they're not interested. They'll always find somebody that will go along with them. And what does he learn from that? I'm bad. The other person's good.
They don't learn how to grow up. And that's, if a parent isn't allowed to parent their child, then there's a problem.
I mean, that's exactly what it is, that we're being taught how to not parent as well, because there's a fear that we're going to be put in jail. And what does that do to the kid, too? They see their mom taken away in handcuffs.
Or more than that it's something that gives the kid leverage. They can get mom taken away in handcuffs, and they can get their way.
Exactly. there's so much to this. I mean, it's and it ties in with this thing of not speaking out when, you know, when not having a conscience, not being character driven, from my perspective, because we're afraid. The fear becomes so overwhelming that we just let things go, and then society just kind of goes this way more and more.
Not my job.
Not my job. Well,
That
I wonder if
mentality.
people know that kind of story to do with you. Sorry, I was just looking at something else. But to do with 9/11 and how you thought somebody else was going to take care of it. I think that's a really
Well,
good.
that's what I thought until I realized that that isn't how it works. That you know, it's I could see that the grown-ups weren't going to take care of it. You know, I have my job to do, and that's somebody else's job. And then pretty soon I realized they're not going to do that. Well, whose responsibility is it? Well, it's our planet, our country. Whose job is it? It's ours, every one of us.
Precisely.
And seeing that, you know, the various things happen, it's you know, I think talking about it is an important thing too, instead of staying silent about it. For example, these kids with the anti-gun march. Do any of those kids really know what they're doing?
I would say not. And the other part about that is how they're being co-opted, because
Yep.
they're all supposed to wear, you know, Gifford T-shirts, and they couldn't get a permit to go to the White House, so they're gonna go anyway. The teachers are encouraging that. So all of this is the same
That's
subject.
encouraging. Yeah, it's the amount of power that the teachers have. It's
And that they're
incredible.
allowed to get away with it from the administration. So it's all these people that are working together, and we wonder about how things like 9/11 happen, or all these big false flags or
Yeah,
whatever.
oh, how the
People work
cover up
together.
keeps going on because
Sorry?
people, or how the cover up keeps continuing.
That's right. And that's why I think this is a really good example, because all of us have control over this bit, you know, when we see kids or when we see teenagers being indoctrinated, what are we doing at that level? Some of us actually are still parents and involved in all of
Yeah,
this.
if you're still parents, yeah, what's a good thing to do? Ask what I would. My first gut instinct is to ask the kid. So, what is this protest about, and why? And how is, you know, what problem are you trying to solve?
Yes. That
And
should
that's
be the
something that,
T-shirt.
yeah, they don't they don't realize that. I was talking with somebody yesterday who's saying, "Oh, what do you think about having guns in schools? Isn't that horrible, arming teachers?" I said, "Oh, so you'd rather just some folk students be armed and nobody else?" Yeah, and they you know, it just hadn't occurred to them. And they, well, I don't want guns in my house. I said, fine. Well, that's your choice. You know, you can put a sign in your front yard saying gun-free zone. But if there's somebody comes burglar or something comes to get you, uh, you know, and the guy next door happens to have a gun and comes over and saves you, wouldn't that be nice? Or the fact that you might have a gun in your house deters the bad guy from coming in. And I
Well,
think
I'm
that's
really
a lot of it, because it was in Australia when they did the gun takeaway thing. Home invasions skyrocketed. Those burglars would come in while people were home. They had no fear of getting shot up or anything. You know, what's the drawback? And
well.
so there's a whole lot more crime that went up.
This is a psyop again, because I think that the people that you can trust the most are the ones that have the gun permits, and the ones that belong to organizations where they're actually learning how to use them. The ones you got to be scared of are the criminals. I
Hmm.
mean,
They don't want just the good guys turning in their guns. And you know, and even if you took away guns from everybody, that, you know, it isn't guns that's killing people; it's the person behind the gun pulling the trigger, who could also set off bombs, who can also set off whatever, you know, run people down with vehicles. You can outlaw vehicles, outlaw, you know, kitchen knives. Outlaw, you know, you got to stop. So it's the mentality behind it that's doing it. And if it seemed like at least half the people out there had guns, you didn't see them, but they probably had them on their person. I think there'd be a whole lot less crime. It isn't that people get shot up; it's that it's a deterrent. Like, okay, I got to go find something else to do with my time now.
Well, the fact that kids have the inclination to go and shoot up schools as well, I just don't think that's a normal thing. I really don't. I think that it's all one big ball of wax, and it's really hard to unravel what's what. Because again, we didn't have this.
You don't unravel it by disarming the good guys.
No, and I'm thinking about when I went to school. Mind you, I live in Canada, so we don't have the same kind of access to guns, I suppose. But I don't remember very much gun play in school, and yet people would bring their guns and show them, their prize rifle or something. It wasn't frowned upon. And it was normalized.
They clean guns in ROTC.
In ROTC?
Yeah, they clean guns. Mm-hmm. They handle guns. I don't know if they had bullets in them, but they clean the guns and learn gun safety and the ROTC in high schools.
Yeah, I'm not sure that we had that. But
it's interesting. In Texas, teachers can carry concealed weapons.
That's Texas for you.
If they want to, if they wanted to, and you don't know who has one, who doesn't. So, is there any wonder why they haven't had a school shoot them up in Texas?
Yeah, it's so funny. It's like they're a whole different country. There's no question about that.
Yeah, you're going to mess with them.
No,
you're going
to mess with Texas.
In the middle of nowhere because they probably have a gun to defend themselves. And somebody made a point, and at first I thought it was silly, but I think they're right, spot on, that it would be sexism, because a lot of women carry guns in their purse for protection. So if they can't, that really is sexism. Is the number of rapes, is that going to go up? Not that they've been shooting people in the past, but it's the thought that they carry a gun that keeps them safe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and
or they might.
That they might. Yeah. So if we were to say that women weren't allowed to carry guns in their purses, there'd be a huge outcry. It's the same kind of basic issue, because you're talking about so-called, well, you're somewhat defenseless when you're a smaller person. If you were smaller than the criminal, then you do need to have these things, whether it's mace or guns or whatever. So now we just say you can't carry mace, you can't carry guns. Well, now you got your easy prey.
Yep. And it's the way our country, guns have always been allowed in this country, and we haven't had shoot 'em ups. So obviously it isn't the guns doing it.
I want to make a comment from the chat. I'm just turning away from the mic for a little bit. Someone from Italy, Chiodo Libero. I'm butchering that name. I'm sorry. Totally different Italy, where you risk going to jail if you shoot a burglar inside your own house for self-defense. It all depends on the circumstances. People here do not have guns at home, as a rule. I think that's true of a lot of European countries. And Canada.
Right. And that's how that country is. It's different ones have different rules.
And so I'm just wondering how that affects things.
They probably don't have a whole lot of guns on the black market. Maybe they do for mafia or something, but for the average person, they probably don't. But they do here, and it's part of the culture.
Yep. Well, it's a right. I think that's the basic difference.
It's the Second Amendment, and I think the reason why kids aren't taught about the Second Amendment much anymore. But
well,
It's part of the survival of the country that you can't, you're allowed to defend yourself against a government out of control or against other citizens out of control.
Makes total sense, because those people that crafted the Constitution had just come from countries that were doing just that. They were disarming the citizenry, and they were taking over. They were tyrants. And it just creates a...
Governments, they could take them over.
Yeah. And that's generally what happens in every country. Australia is the same thing. They had people handing their guns.
If they want to outlaw guns or restrict gun use, are they going to restrict gun use of the Secret Service to protect the president and Congress?
Oh, just so many different situations. And I'm thinking about even calling the police. I know it's not quite the gun issue, but I'm thinking about this idea that people... they say, we don't want guns, we don't want protection. But who's the first person that they'll call when they are in trouble? They call someone with a gun.
Yep.
What's the difference between a cop and that person? It's usually that they're armed. So it's total hypocrisy.
All of the people in Congress and so forth, they have armed guards protecting them. Or they're not showing their guns off, but they have guns on them. Like, why the Scalise guy? Why would there somebody who's when those people? It wasn't the situation where you think they would need to be armed. But I guess the police came and I think they also had some Secret Service, didn't they?
I don't know the details.
But there's the incident recently at the school in Maryland. I don't know if we talked about that before.
Nope. Just happened.
There's a kid went into the school, a 17-year-old, with a gun and shot a girl, and then shot another kid. And right then the police officer on part of the school thing, he was a former SWAT team member, pulled out his gun and shot the kid. Well, the kid shot himself at the same time. I don't know whose bullet killed the kid first, but the kid was prevented from shooting up anybody else.
What a novel idea. So it was actually a guy who was in the school?
Yep, it was in Maryland, that little southern peninsula of Maryland, on the other side of the Potomac from Virginia. South of D.C., between there and the Eastern Shore, that little
near
peninsula
the swamp.
Yeah, it's kind of a rural area, but the kid was kept from continuing on. And if people think that's horrible that somebody would shoot the kid, but I mean, if you don't, what's the cost? A whole classroom getting shot up? He apparently stole the gun from his dad.
Yeah, I put it on the screen because I hadn't really gotten the details. Austin Wyatt Rawlins. It's always interesting how they have the 3 words,
Three names. Yep, they always have put 3 names when they want to have a bad guy.
Something I've noticed.
Lee Harvey Oswald.
Lee Harvey Oswald and John, what's his name, Hinckley. But I know he had 3 names.
The one that John David Chapman or something like that.
Yeah, that was John
there's
Lennon.
3 names with the Chapman, the one that did John Lennon.
Well, I've got it on here. Apparently it was his dad's gun. And it was his school resource officer that killed him.
But he's an armed guy. I call it armed guard, but he was a former SWAT guy. He knew what he was doing.
And he was actually in the in the school.
Yep.
At the time. Yeah,
didn't run out the door.
So now what? See, I look at all these things that happen in clusters, and I just wonder, is this just a copycat thing,
I don't
or
think
what?
you hear about in the evening news because you had somebody shut him down. Somebody with a gun shut him down.
Well, I'm a perfect example of that because I didn't hear about it, and I'm usually
right. I didn't learn about it on media. It's on radio, TV type thing. I learned about it through researching something on the internet. Came across it, but they wouldn't want people to know about that because if they want to get rid of some guns, they wouldn't want people to know about that.
Yeah, well, the discussion in the chat is about that. That's the first step toward tyranny. And it's not as though the Constitution came out of thin air. It came from people who were...
That didn't come by accident, Second Amendment. You know,
it was thought out. And it's been proven over and over. You know, and that's the first thing that happens whenever you see there's tyrants. Like, why would anybody else want your guns?
Yep, and here's a good example, in a way, you can say the Second Amendment didn't apply to the high school in Florida. You know, there are teachers who like to carry guns, but because the school doesn't allow it, they have to leave them in their car or locked up someplace, so they can't have them on their person. And, you know, the teacher who threw his body in front of the bullet to protect the student, you know, ended up dying. You bet that if that person had a gun on him, what they would have done with it. Exactly. And it would have ended you know, the situation.
Well, I think this is a really interesting contrast to what we were talking about with the Florida shooting, as we'll call it. It seems like a lot of things happen in Florida. The Florida bridge, Florida shooting. And
what's in contrast to that?
Yeah, you wonder about why there's so much happening in Broward County. It's quite phenomenal to me.
No, it's a big place like Washington, D.C. I don't think there's, you know, that's anything weird. It's just other than coincidence. And I think you thought before that that was happening near the same area. You know, it's a different area. The school shooting was north of Miami. This was like west and south. Hmm. You know, it was almost in the swamp. It's down the bottom corner.
You know, I don't like getting into any of the conspiratorial stuff because I wasn't there and I don't know much about it at all. But I think
somebody messed up, and it's human nature to mess up, and that's why you don't open the road to traffic until you know you're done and everybody's inspected it. While you work on the bridge, you know, because human nature is that you push the limit until you find out where the limit is. Isn't it human nature? And
I would say so.
But then, like, you know, that's what high school kids do with their cars, whatever. And you hope they survive that era. Yeah. But human nature is to push the limits until you find out where the limits are.
Well, I would say definitely that's the case when it comes to building tall structures. It's amazing to me. I was watching the building of the World Trade Center and Empire State Building.
Except, that isn't. You can't do just a jump there. You have to show what it is. You know, a structure. You have checkers who check the checkers who check the checkers, and so forth.
No, I'm just thinking about the people that were walking along the beams and that sort of thing. That just the level of.
Until they fall. Yeah.
But there were only 14 people that fell, which I found that
amazing.
You know, pretty amazing with the Empire State Building because they're just walking along up there. But I'm just thinking the level of risk and fear and wanting to push the boundaries is human.
Cell phone towers now, there's a new problem because there's OSHA regulations as to no free climbing. You have to be clipped on. You go up and you reclip and then unclip your lower one. Then clip up. You know, so if you ever slip, you're always going to be caught. And then some are in such a hurry to get the job done because they're paid by the job that they free climb. No nets, no ropes. They just, you know, and there's a bunch of them doing that, and a lot of people dying from it. You know, and you get kids who, you know, mentally they're immortal in their mind, but they, you know, a lot of them fall off. That's a deal of pushing the limits. And it's human nature to push the limits until you realize where the limits are. Mm-hmm. And hopefully you survive that. But in all industries, like even the Space Shuttle Challenger, you know, it was a politician making an engineering decision, and I don't think, you know, he didn't do it again for quite a while. But you know, the engineers knew there was a problem. If it was too cold and it's out of range of what it's built for. And not to go up, and the politician wanted to make sure the thing got up there for the press conference with the president to have, you know, their teacher in space business, and decided to override the engineers and ordered it to go up. Mm-hmm. And so you know, it's this pushing things. Okay, right after that, you're going to have people checking the checkers who check the checkers a whole lot more. But as for the bridge in Florida, no business opening it to traffic until it is done and inspected. There's two ways about it. Okay, something unforeseen could happen. They're tightening something and it broke or whatever. Fine. They're unforeseen things, but you don't open it to the public until you're done. It's ridiculous.
And particularly when they've noticed that there's a crack, because, as you say, that's just a no-go in that case.
Well, it's a problem with that. But they had some tensioning bolts. Also, they had to lift the thing in the wrong place, not under one of the vertical struts, because they had a highway divider or something there. So when they're rolling the thing into place, they had to support it someplace else, and they're doing some re-engineering on the site. There's a lot of things to look into. But whatever the case is, see, bottom line, you don't open it to traffic while you're working on it. Because, unforeseen things can happen. You don't open it for pedestrians to walk across it or drive under it or walk under it until you've had it inspected. And it's all done.
As much as it's difficult to divert traffic, you got to do it. And it seems as though that was certainly a possibility. It's not as though it was in a small area. They had a lot of ways of maybe having half the traffic not go through. I'm just trying to think, like there's 8 lanes or something. You could probably make it 2 lanes.
They're putting the pedestrian bridge across the whole thing. So just, that day or that weekend, maybe they can do it on a weekend or pick whatever time and close the road. Because they weren't doing it forever. It was just, when they're installing the bridge. And they prefab it someplace else. And then they put it on these big carts or whatever that roll it into place. And why they're doing that without closing the road is insane.
Mm-hmm.
An area around a building being constructed, they have big chain link fences. Big tall chain link fences, and you're not supposed to get near it. They don't want people anywhere near that in case something falls down while they're building.
Well, I find it ironic that they had actually closed off the walkway and you weren't allowed to walk over it, but people could drive under it. Absolutely.
Well, it wasn't that they closed it off; it was never opened because the bridge hadn't been put in place yet. They're just scooting it in.
Yeah.
It takes just a few hours, and they just wheel it in, and they're putting it in place. There's a reason they should have had traffic going through there.
Yeah. There's a couple of really good videos that I'm not going to be able to put up, unfortunately, because of the way that YouTube works. But there's some, if you go over to Character Driven, I will put them up there. There's a couple of really good demonstrations of tensile strength of cement and, the breaking point. And then one guy actually breaks it all down into, how the bridge was built. If you're interested in going there, which I find it really interesting.
Did you see that video that I sent you about the beam being tested?
Yes, I love that one.
And you can see how, as I say, it takes a licking and keeps on ticking.
Oh, it's amazing. What about that guy that's sitting there? Like it's time-lapse photography, and this guy is sitting in his chair. And I thought, well, that's a pretty good job. All the other people are coming in and out, but he's all excited at the end because they broke their beam.
Yeah, it's impending doom. It's fun that, when I do this, we call it busting lab, materials testing lab for students. I'd have them place bets like either a penny or a nickel, nothing more than that. The closest without going over wins. Mm-hmm. To get their interest up, to watching.
I'll definitely put that on Character Driven because I found it really fascinating, and I imagine any of the.
Can you imagine that having a bunch of students and everybody's put their nickel in or penny in or whatever, that the closest without going over in predicting the failure load wins, and so okay, all right, you're out. I'm next one in the lead, and then
right.
All right, you gotta fail before so and so's number comes up.
I have a feeling you did a lot of that in your classes, and It's a great
Well,
way.
it gets the interest going, because otherwise it's just the numbers mean nothing. So I have them do some rough calculations and an assumption, here's approximations about where it might go, where they think it'll go.
And you're treating the students as though they are future engineers, like they're adults, as opposed to
and just get a feel for what something can take, because it's definitely over the design limits, but you're going to know approximately where it's going to fail. So you're looking at it.
The reason that I really think it's important to have some of these videos available, and as I say, I'm going to put them on the site, including the building of the World Trade Center, for instance, just because we're talking about where the towers go when we're talking about your book. It's really helpful for somebody who's a non-engineer, because they look at it and it becomes really difficult to believe that, planes could wreck. In fact, they talk about that. They just say that planes would not be able to penetrate the steel on the outside of the building.
The thing that got me that day, and it shows how shocked everybody is, because the other faculty in that faculty conference room didn't have any question about that. That was the most bizarre thing. Like, what is going on here? But the wing is out in the wingtip. It can't even hold fuel out there. It just can barely hold its own weight. You can see it how flop along as the plane's driving down the runway. Out the end it kind of bounces. But it's like 5 inches deep. With a wing out there, and you see this 5-inch deep slice through the steel columns. Yeah, how can that be? And then you ever look out, from the airplane window, you can look out on top of the wing and you see no step here. Those wings are delicate. You can't support a human's weight to walk around in the wing, except for in certain places, but definitely not out on that tip. Yet it can slice through steel columns. Sure.
And I think when you look at the building itself, because some people just look at it now, it's iconic. They haven't actually seen the building of it, and they weren't there when it was actually there. We've got a generation of people now that didn't live while the Twin Towers were there, so they didn't see how big they were. But when you see these videos and people talking about the structures, even inside, the way they had to build the elevators, as and how it was basically 3 buildings on top of each other, and how they serviced them. There's a lot of stuff in there. There's amazing amounts of infrastructure.
I forget the exact amount. I got to look that data up again. But I was looking up, Mount Trashmore, and there's one in Iowa, I think around Cedar Rapids, and there's just someplace to pile up all the rubble of something and then pave it over and have it into a nice, park somebody can ski off of or something. And so they had one in Washington State. They've had various ones, but this recently, where I think it was in 2008, there was this huge flood, and it flooded out homes and demolished all sorts of neighborhoods. And they added on to Mount Trashmore, about the amount of less than the amount of what the World Trade Center was. Each tower was 500,000 tons, and I think that it was just under 500,000 tons was all the rubble they added on from I forget how many, over 1,000 homes, and this, that, and the other. They had this big laundry list of stuff that had gotten piled onto this big landfill thing. To think that that's less than one of the towers. It's incredible, isn't it?
Very much so. One of the things that people might be interested in doing is taking a look at the 1993 bombing, because that did quite a bit of damage. It didn't do structural damage, really. I mean, they went in there and fixed it within about 48 hours. It was amazing how many people were involved in that. But you look at the amount of rubble that was created from that bomb that went off underneath in the parking lot there. Most of the time was spent getting rid of the rubble. And that was just
trash,
a small part of the building that disappeared. And that was really revealing to me, because that's what it would have looked like, only, millions of times that amount of rubble, because it was just one area that was ruined. So if people are interested, go back and take a look at these videos and show them to your friends who are still having a hard time with the idea that maybe they think they're bombs that went off or whatever they think. And it's just, this is what a bomb does.
It blows chunks, lots of them. Big
blows chunks. Yeah, and they were talking about how they could see all these bits and pieces, and here, as you say, there was toilets, and actually Empire State Building they brought down. They said, all the bidets were, or as they called them, the bidettes were left. And, you start to notice these things, when you start to do your research, your own research, you start to go, oh yeah, that's what it looks like when a building comes down.
Or gets destroyed. You get, you think about all the stuff in there. That's of something prepared for demolition. But it's not prepared for demolition, like where all the file cabinets, where all the, computers, where all the desks and chairs.
And that's what I found interesting about these huge, big generators. And, they had to actually move all of the water up, and they had to have this infrastructure for the electricity. And it was amazing, some of the stuff that they had to come up with just to make that building work. Because normally you'd have the water on the top of the building and it would kind of be gravity fed. Well, they had to pump it up.
They have it, well, actually, it's different than that. Like a 10-story building, whatever, they're probably pumping it up from, the bottom. But if it's any bigger than that, they can't pump water. You can't get water pressure on the top floor. So what they do is they pump it up into a tank, and you have a new head. So then you pump it up into another tank, and then another one. So like leapfrog, and some folks who worked there in the building said that you'd hear the water going at night. They'd pump it up, and so you have all these tanks in the building every so many floors. And it was just every so many floors we saw those squirts coming out of the side of the building, and could very well have been, water tanks, because they got to, let go at some point if the thing's being dustified.
But, I wish I could show that film, but I'll put it on the website on characterdriven.com. But you can see these sprays coming out the side, and I guess a lot of people are saying that, oh well, that's evidence of bombs. Because you can...
Bombs go have to go the speed of sound or something when they start. This is more like just a squirt. And you should have had a whole lot more than that for, the amount of stuff in the building. Mm-hmm. and you have one of these every 10 floors or so. You're going to turn a building to powder by having a bomb every 10 floors.
And they're very uniform.
Yep, and they're in the middle of the face of the building. Not where you have, the corner office is prime real estate, surely. So, you expect it to be sort of near the center of the building. And you can look at the various drawings and schematics and see that's where the water tanks were.
Yeah, I'm curious about how many people have actually looked into the structure of that building, because to me it's not even just that there's one building that has that structure. There's two that were built identically. 3 buildings on top of each other, basically, as you say. You push the water up, and so you have 3 discrete.
They would have to pump it up to several different tanks by the time, just for 1/3 of the building, because they need a new water head, to pump it up to again. Because otherwise, think of, if you had just pumped it from the ground all the way to the roof, you'd be siphoning out that tank. That's a lot of water pressure. A 1/4 mile tall.
Mm-hmm.
You don't pump water up like that. But also because water is such a premium up at the top, because it's got to travel, all that distance to get up there. I was, concluding that they must have, I call them turbo toilets. The ones where they use water pressure, use air pressure with the water to give it more gusto. So it isn't like your home toilet, it's just, water gravity driven. But if you could put in, jet air, it makes the water more productive. So you don't use as much water at all if you have it, pressurized air going with it. So I call them turbo toilets. And a lot of big buildings and commercial toilets where they have a whole row of them. You know how they flush with a lot more gusto than your home toilet. But still, so they have air pressure tanks up there as well as water tanks.
And then it's all going to come back down. Do they have holding tanks, or do you think that it goes all the way back down?
The water?
What comes out of the toilets?
When they flush it, I don't know how it goes down. I don't think it just drops, because that would be it would suck people down the toilet too.
Yeah.
It'd be too much. So it probably goes down to different holding things that take it down into a bigger.
That's what I'm thinking.
Down bigger pipelines.
Yeah, there's so much to this, and if anyone's ever designed a house, you know how difficult it is to figure all this stuff out. So imagine
you have an air, stack for the toilet to burp.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, so you have the same things with the building.
I find all of this so interesting. There's somebody, Matt, who comes and visits us every week, was talking about his family and how it's hard to talk to them about this because they don't listen. And I really hope that this kind of show is the place that you could bring them and have them ask questions or hear from an engineer how things work. Because it's not trying to prove or disprove anything. It's just looking at the evidence, and part of it is how the building is built. To me, it's not about disproving it. It's just going, that seems very hard to penetrate. It seems...
Yeah. But to think about, building that tall, you've got to have water tanks going up there. It isn't going to be pumping up in one fell swoop. So what happens when those water tanks start to give way? Like if the building's being dustified, well, you have a pressure vessel, and if the wall's getting weaker and weaker, it's going to come to a point where it suddenly ruptures. And it's kind of like a balloon.
What I'm hoping for people like Matt and the rest, I've talked about my friend and actually I just gave him a copy of the book. It's interesting because people will think that you're talking conspiracy right away. And what my goal is in presenting this show each week is to talk about anything other than conspiracy. It's not about who did it, why they did it. Doesn't matter here. You can find that somewhere else.
This would point out in the preface of my book that, a book isn't about a conspiracy. The conspiracy is where two or more people conspire to commit a crime, to do something illegal, and it isn't about the who. So it can't be about a conspiracy. And I'm not theorizing anything, so it's not about a theory either, much less a conspiracy theory. The conspiracy theory is about a theory about somebody plotting and planning, conspiring to do something together. So if you're talking about fact,
that's how people have been shut down from hearing the message, because they've heard this so much, and that whole idea of conspiracy theory was rolled out in order not to ask questions. So I think for me, it's just a matter of approaching somebody as being intelligent and trying to get them
to make you feel noble for talking about conspiracy theories. Like, they're just name calling us a conspiracy theorist, but it's, what's wrong with being, a conspiracy theorist? But you can't solve crime with a conspiracy theory. You need facts, you need evidence. So, conspiracy theories really are just, it's about storytelling, just getting around the table and storytelling. But the various control organizations or cover-up gangs like to get the followers thinking that it's okay to be conspiracy theorists, so they don't look for facts.
That's the other side of this, and that's a really good point. They're the gatekeepers of everybody's narrative. I mean, it doesn't matter. Even if you are woken up, as they say, to the facts, then you're put into this other group. You're cattle herded over to another group.
who are conspiracy theorists. You know, 9/11 was an inside job. Those T-shirts, you know, if they're saying it's an inside job, they're saying they know who did it. That's a conspiracy theory.
Mm-hmm. And so the way, I'm just trying to help people like Matt and other people in the audience who have this difficulty, because we all do, and I'm sure you have as well, even when you're talking to people about your book. So how do you approach this subject? How when you say you're on a plane with somebody or you just met somebody?
Oh, well, it's, you know, like I did just there. But when I just talk about whatever they want to talk about. I mean, see, I'm not promoting. I'm not pushing an agenda. I'm a scientist who did an investigation. If somebody wants to know what the conclusions are, what they want to read the report, fine. Here they can go read the report. I don't, you know, unlike various other characters, I'm not pushing anything. I don't need to get X number of followers, because I'm not trying to, you know, psyop a nation or psyop a number of people. It isn't about how many believers you have or followers you have. It's like somebody who did an experiment on the speed of light or whatever. Okay, here's how I did it, and here's my, you know, my measuring device, and here's the data. You know, you're welcome to look at it. You know, you don't need to go out and push it down anybody's throat. If somebody wants to understand, here, you know, here's the information. If you don't want to understand, well, that's fine too. That's your choice. Whatever floats your boat. But if you don't want to know what happens, and you want to see, if somebody wants to be brainwashed, they'll be brainwashed anyway. If they're looking at, you know, what's most popular, they're not looking for facts. They're not looking for truth. They're looking for, you know. I wish you could play this song. It's from probably around 1970. In Crowd.
I wish
that
I
was
could
one of
too.
my favorites.
One of the things I do want to do, when we first started doing this, I did it on my live stream channel because YouTube didn't do live streaming. So what I do want to do is actually call people over there sometime, and we can do whatever the heck we want, and we won't get kicked off. But if anybody wants to see some of the shows, there, I'll have the link over at the website. Basically, what I'm saying is go over to characterdriven.com, because I'll have a lot of other resources there, and we will put up that song, and who knows, I might edit it in. But so tell people what the song is again.
Let me see. It's I don't remember who did it. Trying to look it up here. Okay, I'm in with the in crowd. I'll go where the in crowd goes. I'm in with the in crowd, and I know what the in crowd knows. Any time of the year, don't you hear? Dressing fine, making time. We breeze up and down the street. We get respect from the people we meet. They make way day or night. They know the in crowd is out of sight. It's another verse. I'm in with the in crowd. I'll know everything, every latest dance. When you're in with the in crowd, it's so easy to find romance. Any time of the, don't you hear? If it's square, we ain't there. You make every minute count. Our share is always the biggest amount. Other guys imitate us, but the original is still, let's see, we're still the greatest in crowd. It goes on. Let's see, any time of the year, don't you hear spending cash, talking trash? I'll show you a real good time. Come on with me and leave your troubles behind. I don't care where you've been. You ain't been nowhere until you've been in the in crowd. With the in crowd, in crowd, in crowd. I think it was around 1970, wasn't it?
Well, with some
Mamas
of those words.
and the Papas.
Mamas and the Papas. I was going to ask you who did that.
Yeah.
Okay. So you guys can go check that out, the in crowd. Mamas and the Papas. It'll be a good history lesson for you.
Maybe it was 69. I don't know. It's somewhere around there, but it's I thought it really captures it well. Because people want to be with the in crowd, and they do whatever the in crowd does. Mm-hmm. They don't think for themselves, in other words.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing for people that have a modicum of information, and they often, what I've found is that I can sound a little bit arrogant if I think that's the balance that we have to have, is to be able to ask the other people who are still watching mainstream media and getting their information from those that are trying to make them part of the in crowd, to be willing to step out of that and and ask questions of those people that are still involved. What's your perspective on this? And it's hard because it's hard to get
the people who are in with the in crowd. I'll go ahead and call them that. Just group think. They have a list of talking points they can spiel off. They have no idea if that information is true or false or where it came from. They just assume it's true, and they just memorize, regurgitate. Stand down orders, put options, rivers of molten metal, steel-toed boots are melting, fires burn for night. They go on this long list of stuff. They mentioned Larry Silverstein, what George Bush's cousin's uncle's brother, whatever, did. What happened to the buildings? They never get to that.
That's why I love that picture that you have at the very beginning of your book, and I often put it up on the screen because for some reason I just really enjoy watching that video where you're sort of showing people, or the video showing people around, and where the rubble is said to have gone underneath and that sort of thing. But it's looking at the
it's amazing how all the rubble went down into the basements. Okay, how did it get there?
That's why it's so great to ask people, so where do you think the rubble went? And they'll tell you whatever the mainstream media said. Oh, it went underneath. Oh, that's interesting. Let's take a look at this. Here's, Bugs Bunny.
Well, not just that. You could just ask this. Remember the people who survived, the 14 people, there's 13 firefighters, then one civilian, Josephine, in Stairway B, the second, third, and fourth floor. So how did this stuff get to the basement? Did it, to go down Church Street, make a... down Liberty Street, turn on Church Street, and then go up to Vesey Street and down into the parking garage? Is that how it got there? Yeah, because it had to have gone around those people.
Yes. Well,
and then the other thing, the people with the nukes in the basement, and I used to say about the people in the Stairway B, ride 'em cowboy sitting on top of a nuke. How did it destroy the top of the building if the nuke's in the basement without coming through those people?
Right.
Those people actually serve a very good piece of evidence. They didn't get crushed, and nor did they burn up. They walked out. They looked up and saw blue sky and walked out on their own.
When you first said that, I really didn't get the significance of it because I really didn't understand all the dynamics.
They're right in the middle of the building.
Yeah, and now when you've read the book and you've done some more research and you start looking at it, you just go, well, duh, that's crazy. That's impossible. Given that
the building didn't get smashed to the ground because those people wouldn't have been able to walk out. And so you can't say that it all got mashed into the basement. You can't say it all burned up because those people weren't cooked to death. They didn't remember having been cooked to death. They didn't talk about any high heat.
Mm-hmm.
The things that they've said, but it's not things that they experienced. That's another thing. The firefighters are not physicists. They repeat what they hear, but then there's some of them that would think on their own. And it was a confusing time. Mm-hmm. But it still comes down to those 14 people in Stairway B. There's actually 2 above them that survived, even though the building around them didn't, like from the 22nd floor or so.
Well, I think you have known of firefighters that still had the same narrative, but now that time has passed, sometimes you can actually talk to them and have them reason it through because it's not quite as emotional.
Well, Yeah, there's some of them that they didn't really know what was going on, but they just repeat whatever the in crowd says. I guess I'm going to use that term for just going with the flow and not thinking independently. And so if you come across somebody who's having trouble with what you're talking about, um, you'll soon get a list of talking points from, or scenarios like, oh, we know that the airplanes went into the buildings and they fell down an hour later. Fall down, go boom. Okay. How how do you know that? It isn't cause and effect just because one thing happened, then another thing happened. The seismic signal wasn't enough for the buildings to fall down, go boom. And then the firefighters weren't crushed. You can, you don't need to tell them a whole lot of stuff. Just use evidence. But the biggest problem, they have to want to know something. Most people don't want to know.
Right. Can you talk a little bit about Building 7? Because there are people that sort of basically they look at the two towers and then they sort of cite Building 7 as evidence of.
Because they've been taught to
That's
focus
right.
on Building 7.
So that's why I wanted to
You could
address
focus
that a
on
little
Building
bit.
4 or 3 or something. Yeah, Building 7, went away, and it didn't make a big thud when it hit either. It was basically dustified before it quote came down. It was just an outer shell left. Because if something's slamming onto bedrock, the seismic chart's going to pick it up. But there was no S wave or P wave associated with any of the events in Manhattan on 9/11. What I mean by the events, there's two airplane-shaped holes that appeared in the building. Tower 1 went poof, Tower 2 went poof, and Building 7 went poof. So it's 5 events. There's no S wave or P wave associated with any of those events. If somebody drops a big boom of a crane onto the ground, there's an S wave and P wave, associated with as well as a surface wave. But for those events, those 5 events, there was only a surface wave. And they used the surface wave to calculate the approximate equivalent seismic magnitude. And for Building 7, the equivalent seismic magnitude was 0.6 on the Richter scale. And that's like a jackhammer. And actually, the people didn't hear it. From the people on various video, like this woman Barbara Crowley on West Street, she has Building 7 behind her, so she's not looking at it, and she's saying, "Well, we need food, we need snacks, we need bandages, we need whatever." She's going at it, and then the crowd goes, "Ah!" She looks around. What happened? She has no idea what's going on. There's just a gasp of the crowd. And turns around, Building 7 just dropped behind her. She had no idea. With the controlled demolition, you hear a bang, 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 and then you see the building start to ease on down towards the ground, and you crash, you bang, lots of sounds. This is whisper quiet.
Right, and sorry, there's a few
and
different.
There was little material left. There's just the outer walls. About all that's left. You didn't have toilets and desks. You didn't have any of the innards really of the building.
So, for somebody who is saying that they were watching the building bubble all day, and yet they're still having they're saying that it was empty. It was not empty. There's no way that they emptied that building that.
It had windows in it. It had windows, and if you prepare something for controlled demolition, you must remove anything that's not nailed down and anything that's nailed down that you can remove without collapsing a wall or something. And also you move all window glass. It comes projectile otherwise. The glass would go flying and decapitate somebody or slice trees, or there'd be pock marks in the building across the street. A Coke bottle in the windowsill, that's like a missile. If something that goes above the speed of sound, bombs do when things explode. So you get out everything that's not nailed down and everything that's nailed down, including like toilets and all. Plus, you remove all the windows. You need to prepare a building for controlled demolition because there's going to be stuff going flying. And it's going to decapitate somebody. It's going to destroy other buildings in the area. And with normal like controlled demolitions, they have buildings wearing aprons just in case there's a little piece of concrete goes flying. And so that didn't happen. The Verizon building got a little bit of something damaging it, but not much. The post office on the other side didn't get any damage. The stuff didn't even go completely across the street. There's some bare places on the sidewalk where the stuff didn't even go to. But we know that in reality, it was not prepared because you had glass windows like that Hess guy, the city lawyer, who was stuck on something like the 4th or 6th floor or so, and he had to work hard to slide open the window so he could lean out and holler. And that's on a video. And so you knew that there's glass windows there in the building that were still intact. And those would have, if they hadn't dustified, they would have, damaged the post office building. The post office building would look like it had machine gun fire all over the side. That didn't happen. It's just right across the street. There's 3 lanes of traffic, and that's the width of the street. There's a sidewalk on either side, but it's very, very short distance. And for sure you'd have shrapnel flying over there and dinging up the building if you had any bombs exploding. And it is amazing if you look at some of those images to see the picture from the top of Tower 2. You look way down there in the street, down the canyon. You see it. How on earth could that building go away and just heap up in one heap and not go across the street? Mm-hmm. Rather incredible. A little bit got over on the forgot the name of the building behind it on the other side, but it suffered the same problems that Baker's Trust did. It got infected and had to be taken apart.
Yeah, it kept there was some reaction that kept taking place there.
The one in Baker's Trust was kind of clear, and they had actual dust samples and stuff that were made public. But the saga behind it, somebody could write a whole book on the saga. See, I'm not interested in conspiracy theories, so I didn't go off into that. Because for example, that the company who got the not the lowest bidder, but the highest bidder got the job. Does that make sense? The one who's gonna ask to be paid the most got the job. And then after they got going, it turns out they weren't paying their employees. For demolishing the building, they weren't paying their employees, and so their employees quit. And then somebody investigated the company, and no, they hadn't taken down a contaminated building before. Come to think of it, they hadn't taken down any building before. Come to think of it, they weren't a company. It's weird. It was called the John Galt Company. Isn't that interesting?
SES.
Name? And then there's all sorts of weird sagas of this thing. It was like something to keep the clock running. They were to take it apart. They cleared off an entire floor, and then they take the steel members out, and then they moved down and take So there was just the steel left, and to make sure nobody fell over the edge, they put plywood around the outer edge, and they had this weird fire. The steel was on fire, but the plywood wasn't. that was interesting.
That's a really good picture for people that just want to ask a question of folks that are not convinced. Just show them the picture from the book, and I don't know exactly what page it is, but there's it's quite a few with the paper.
That was sort of the aftermath of this was like several years later when they're trying to take down Baker's Trust.
Yes.
And they have one problem after another. And they had a standpipe that fell on the 10 and 10 firehouse, and then they, somebody got hurt or killed from that. Oh yeah, there's 2 firefighters that got killed in that fire on the open floor. That where the steel was on fire, but the plywood wasn't, and there was nothing on the floor, but they got killed on the floor for some reason. Makes you wonder.
This is the horrible thing too about the people that worked at Ground Zero, because they weren't aware of what was happening.
I know nothing. They better.
And you see how many people contracted this mysterious disease, and it affected their lungs and that sort of thing. But it was a reaction taking place in that.
Well, not just that. Aside from that, no. If you dustify a building, and the dust is a large quantity of the dust is about the size of DNA, or 1/100th of the size of red blood cells, and you have every constituent of the building having been turned to dust, above a certain height. So what's in the air? So it goes right into your bloodstream, across the blood-brain barrier. I mean, you're inhaling dustified building, dustified contents of the building. Your body isn't made to handle that. That's going to, kill somebody off real fast. Weird cancers, of course. Your body's not made to inhale, dustified human, dustified desk, dustified steel columns, ceramic toilets, whatever was in the building is turned to dust. I'm not saying everything, but above a certain level.
On page 146, there's a picture of a guy that is standing over the dust, and this is taken on the 13th, so 2 days after the event. And he's looking very contemplative. I wonder what's going through his head, because this is so obvious. You can see all the buildings around, and you can see that there's very little in the way.
Yeah, a pitiful guy with a shovel. Yeah, he looks like, this is the building. This is what's left. And the fact he has a shovel, it's like, okay, we're cleaning up the remains of the building, or what are we doing here?
Well, and this is for anybody who thought that there are big trucks coming in and taking all of the rubble off to, China or wherever they were doing. This guy's working with a shovel. He's taking dust and putting it somewhere, I don't know, but you can see the size of the buildings around him. The rubble's gone.
Out of the way to get to something, to see if there's survivors around. Who knows? It doesn't mean that there was absolutely no steel remaining, but like 80% of the building is turned to dust.
And it's so obvious when you look at these pictures that so many didn't get a chance to see, but they're out there. I don't think you can necessarily find them on the internet now. They've probably been scrubbed, but they're certainly here in your book. One of the questions that came from a person in the audience, they are asking why the art world has been silent about 9/11. I mean, I have my own ideas, but I'm going to hand that along to you.
Well, if you're not with the in crowd, you don't get work.
Do you think the art world knows any more than the rest of the world? I think they've probably all got the same cognizant dissonance about what's happening.
Are you talking about like Hollywood, or what kind of art?
He's saying visual arts, for example. His name's Bjorn, so I'm going to assume that he might not be a Hollywood guy.
Well, if you think about if somebody actually draws a picture of what really happened, and not what you're supposed to believe happened. There's so much of our industry. It's not just academia. It's not just politicians. It's not just everything. Just about. If you want to sell your pictures in the future, you're going to be blacklisted if you stick your neck out too far. So you have to be careful, and including popular radio hosts. I think that they can't touch it with a 10-foot pole. They have to keep the regular storyline going. So the good ones know just how much they can say.
They're not much different than anybody else, and some of them, I would say, I'm going to say that people who are in that world are often not as politically oriented. They may have a political bent, but often they're the easiest ones to psyop, I'm afraid, because they're sort of focused on other things. They're not looking at things like 9/11
No, I think the
in that
ones
way.
in like artists and so forth who paint pictures or draw pictures, that type. I think that they see it more clearly than others. Actually, it was an artist that taught me this. I forgot who it was, but it was, if you're listening, please let me know again. I'd like to give credit where credit's due. And it was a brilliant thing. They're talking about an exercise they learned in art class, drawing class, is like how some desks have a drawer that comes out for your keyboard.
Mm-hmm.
Take the keyboard away, put a piece of paper there and a pencil, and slide it back under with your hands. I mentally, do this. Or if you have some way of putting your hands in a box, you can't see what you're drawing, and and then look at something and try to draw it.
Hmm.
They were explaining, that what this does, it forces you to see what is there, not what's supposed to be there. Because if you're gonna, you're drawing a line across, you got to pick up your pencil to connect to something else. Well, you got to know where your pencil is, because if you can't see what you're drawing, you're busy looking at what relates to what. And it seems like it's an amazingly good exercise to do. So that's what I'm thinking, that people who draw or paint, especially those who draw, if they've done it for a while and are good at it, they probably are good at drawing what is there instead of what is supposed to be there, or they know the difference. But I thought that was a brilliant example. Think about that. And that's how they saw, when they saw my book, they were just, they had to contact me and chime in, because it was, it is exactly what they had seen. Because looking and just, they're not necessarily having to make judgments, but they're just seeing what is really there. And most people tend to see what they're supposed to see, what they're told to see.
Muted myself. On the screen, I have a picture that was painted by Stephen Shellen, and he's had quite a few different art shows. You'll notice that it says bombshell on the picture. He does amazing work, and this is a guy that was a Hollywood actor, and he became an artist. But the way that he became an artist was through the process of being awoken to what's happening in the world, because he was targeted. So when you're talking about artists, there's a variety of different people who express themselves, and he does some amazing work, but he's considered to be completely nuts. He's had so much ridicule, and people have no idea what he's trying to say in some of his art, but it's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. So I'm going to try and find some more, but I hope that helps. The art world is speaking out. Some of the artists are speaking out. They get marginalized for the most part.
Careful, yeah. They need to be real careful at it.
I would say, like everybody else, whether you're a writer, an artist, or a scientist, the first thing that they do to collect you up and make you part of the group is to discredit you and say, well, you don't want to be crazy, do you? You want to be normal like us. And
right.
It's all part of what you're talking about, being part of the in crowd, depending on what crowd you're in.
We're part of the in crowd. Actually, there's a certain length of you can play without having the copyright issue. But how old does music have to be before it falls out of copyright? Also, we're getting
50
old
years
enough,
or
aren't
something.
we?
No, I think the problem is that they're trying to get us,
Oh
and
yeah,
they're trying to
right.
get
But
this channel because I watched a show the other day and they played a whole song, and I don't see them gone. But man, every time I put anything, another YouTube video, I could give credit to people. They give me a copyright strike, or else they just shut the video down altogether. So they're
what about
trying.
all the people that are doing cover songs of somebody else? Of rock songs. They their own singing of it.
Well, I would imagine it's fine because before I started doing this show, I mean, I could give you evidence. I could show you what I had up there, and there were quite a
They
few
wouldn't be able to
different.
sell it because they get a copyright against them.
Well, I
If
just
they,
think it's funny because at that time, I guess a couple of months ago, when I actually created my own music from scratch, which, okay, so for instance, the opening, I took an old movie and I'm using the actual movie, so, but I added some other things to it so that they could say that it was, you know, you have to substantially change it. So if it's a cover, I would say it's the same thing. You're allowed
oh,
to do
okay.
that.
So
But
maybe we could have somebody else sing that song, or if somebody sang the cover, we found a cover singer on YouTube. Would that work?
I just can't say. It just seems so
That's right.
arbitrary. So I would say yes under normal circumstances because
It's not under normal circumstances. I understand that.
no, I have a radio show and I play all sorts of music and we just, we give credit to the artist and they say, great, thanks for featuring us. Uh, anyway, we know what's happening with YouTube and all the other social media sites, and I do hope that there are a lot of people that are out there that are suing them, and I hope that they're successful. So, because I don't have the money to do that, but I just want people to know that because last week I took the video down, another week it was banned, and there's all sorts of different things going on in the background. I find it frustrating, actually, but anyway, I'm glad to be able to have everyone here and host the show in whatever form we can do it. But that's by way of explanation. Anyway, up on the screen, I have the Stephen's. He's got a website. Sorry, I'm just trying to figure out what I'm trying to say. He goes by Stephen Schellenberger, just to be funny.com, and he did a movie called The Spark, and it's a very avant-garde movie, but it's really basically about being surveilled. And really, when we're talking about YouTube, that's exactly what's happening. Where our speech is being limited in the same way that the gun thing is happening. It's like if you're not following the narrative, you're going to be shut down. And it's a slow process, and it's scary actually to see what's happening.
Yeah, if you're not part of the in crowd.
Yep. I've chosen not to be part of the in crowd. Well, the first thing they do is take away the money. Not that I was making, it was helping a little bit with the rent, but it's not a big deal. But they think that it's going to be a big deal, that's going to be the thing that makes you stop doing what you're doing. Either pay people a lot, like with Stephen. This is another thing I heard from another actor. They said they get you involved in real estate. They're always getting you to buy more than you can really afford so that you can't afford not to do the movies. And then you buy into the whole system that way.
Well, it's like college loans.
Sorry?
It's like college loans.
Exactly. Student loans, college loans. Yes, exactly. And I hadn't thought about that either. It's a way of roping you in, getting you in debt. And then you've got places like Citibank that have decided that if you want to buy weapons with their card, that they're asking you not to be one of their customers. So all the people with Second Amendment sentiments are canceling their Citibank card.
It was Dobie Gray who first did it.
Sorry, say that again.
Sorry, Dobie Gray. I
Who's
make
Dobie
sure
Gray?
yeah, it's a singer. They first sang the In Crowd song. I think
Oh,
Mom's Papa may have done a cover on theirs.
should I take a risk? Go with Dobie Gray?
Um, I can play a little bit here. I mean, it's old. I'll play that much. You hear it?
Uh-huh. I heard it.
Is that familiar?
Yeah, I've heard it. But
Yeah,
then
it's
I'm old.
I just wanted this stuff so people could see if they remembered it.
Anybody remember it? I'll have to wait. There's a bit of a lag. I'll see if anybody remembers that one. What I would
That
say to
wasn't.
people out there is I'm hoping that you're learning things that make you feel a little bit more confident about using your own brain and not having to rely on other people's information so that you can have, real questions to ask. That's what I find is happening with me because it seems so obvious after a while. You just kind of go, okay, so that's an interesting idea. Tell me more about it. And it's so much easier to feel relaxed about not having to push things down people's throats. You can just have a conversation.
And to know what it is that you know that you know that you know, and to know that everything else you don't know. If somebody tells you something, yeah, that's interesting, but not to take it as the gospel. It's just to unless you know that you know something, you don't pass it on and repeat it either. It's just like, okay, collect information, but if um, yeah, be responsible for what you know that you know,
Hmm.
rather than or some people, if they criticize somebody for saying, oh, they're totally nuts because they said that the airplanes didn't take the World Trade Center down. Well, that is a statement in itself, and if you repeat that, and somebody later says, well, I didn't know any better. Well, that's your job to you don't repeat stuff unless you know it, even if it's to denigrate something else. So you're denigrating what is actually the truth, but because you think it's goofy. If you don't know what the truth is, you don't you shouldn't have a right to put judgment on something.
Well, yeah, and that's part of the lesson of this, I think, is that, when you say know what you know, know what it is that you know, that you know.
And know what it is that you don't, and know that everything else you don't know. And so if you hear a rumor, you don't just assume it's fact until somebody corrects it.
Well, this is what's happening with mainstream media because this is what I take offense at as a journalist because they'll say sources tell us, or, they start editorializing on things. And that is teaching us not to know what we know. Because we can then say, oh, well, they said on blah, blah, blah that this was the case. Well, they've gotten it as secondhand information and they haven't done the proper research and vetting either. So it becomes a great big tale that goes around the world. What do they say? The lie gets around the world before the truth is putting its shoes on.
Yeah, I think it was Samuel Clemens who said that. Mark
I like
Twain.
it.
Yeah.
And now it's actually the mainstream media that is, well, and other people too. There are lots of people that push a narrative rather than saying, well, I do know this, but I haven't got any evidence about this, so I can't really verify it.
I like it how Mark Levin, if a caller calls in to say something, he shuts him down. He says he doesn't know whether it's true or not, and he's going to be responsible for passing on information, even if it comes out of the caller's mouth.
Mm-hmm.
He isn't going to be responsible for passing along that rumor if he doesn't know it to be true.
Well, if nothing else, I'm hoping that people that read your book and look at the evidence will have a different perspective on how they process information generally. It's different than you're going to learn in school, that's for sure.
Yeah, and so much is based on rumor mill. Like it's amazing the number of people who believe whatever has been on the mainstream media, and they, don't stop to redigest it or something, or to sort it out themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Like, all the allegations of somebody before the election, the timing should be a big clue. Allegations of sexual misconduct, and suddenly they're not important after the election. That's another clue. But people take it as fact, even though they're just allegations. And if we, degrade our culture into, mob rule witch hunts, what do we have? Not a civilized society. It doesn't matter which side you're rooting for. It matters what kind of a culture do we want? Do we want a civilized society, or do we want mob rule and witch hunts?
Mm-hmm. And whether we're talking about the neighbor calling the police on the parent who's got a kid outside, or...
Yep, exactly. Excellent point. That's the same thing. The police locked up this woman based on rumor. And they investigated, and it wasn't correct. Meanwhile, where were the kids? They didn't have a mother at home.
I find that absolutely bizarre and frightening. And, I know this to be true because I see it, I've seen it in my own life, and having looked after kids and been a mom. It's unbelievable what kind of world we're living in right now.
And that shouldn't matter. It's not like whose football team is winning. Which is what they make this Trump versus Hillary Clinton business about. They make it like you got to root for one or the other, and one's all good and one's all bad, and rah rah rah, and whoever team you're rooting for. Yeah, that's a distraction. Just look at what kind of a world you want to live
in. That's the interesting thing with people who are, very involved in conspiracies and that sort of thing. When you ask them why they're trying to rid the world of the bad guys, what kind of community are they trying to create? And very often they haven't looked that far ahead, and they find it to be an interesting question. And I think that is there are a couple of people in the chat that are saying that they just want to live in a peaceful world, and they want all this stuff to go away. And I would say that's a really good goal.
Right. So how do we make it go away? Feed it?
That's a good question. I think for me it's just to educate yourself and stick to the evidence and be willing to speak up.
Right, because otherwise you're a minority. I mean, you're just like this one person off to the side, and nobody ever hears or sees from you again.
So if we take this situation with the neighbor, this is the hard part, is that you're going to have to walk over to your neighbor's house and say, I saw, Johnny outside, and I was a little bit concerned. I just wondered if you need some help. Are you busy on the phone or whatever? Because
Johnny's outside. Yeah.
Yeah, because if it really is your concern about Johnny being taken,
and climb down on the sheets like a jailbreak.
Well, yeah, and I just think this interaction between people, if we are truly concerned, then we will do something about it ourselves. We don't have to always call in the authorities. Like, that's what we were taught to do in school. You can't solve things yourself. You got to get the teacher involved.
No, if you can't solve things yourself.
We can solve things ourselves. We don't need...
Right. But if you can't, then you should worry about going elsewhere. And what, think about what kind of a government do we have. We want a totalitarian government that controls our every thought and our every move. No, then we need to control ourselves, unless we want somebody else to control us. And so, look at what, like I'm lucky in a wonderful neighborhood. If one of my chickens got out, unbelievable, this big, huge Brahma hen, it flew up out of this little hole in the pen roof. I had it, it's caged in over the top, and there's this one hole, and it found its way out. Well, my neighbor called me and said, "Your chicken's over my new grass seed." Okay, we haven't got her. and made sure I patched that hole up. I just couldn't believe it. Remember the time I told you they flew up? Up there was
Yes.
two of them. But instead of calling the police or something,
Or
you
animal
know,
control.
yeah, or the dog catcher, whatever. She let me know that I need to. That took care of it real fast.
It's a great example of what we need to do, and I think these things like Facebook and even YouTube and that sort of thing become much easier it becomes easier for us not to be involved on a personal level, and we need to get back that sense of community again, where we're willing to take the risk. If we really are concerned about the chickens next door or the kids next door or whatever it is, or 9/11, then we need to find
The
ways to
dog on the
communicate with
street
each other.
that gets loose, I don't call animal control to go get him. I go, I even bought the people a doggy run and installed it for him.
Yeah, it's a reciprocal thing. Everybody has problems. Everyone needs help from their neighbors. So we don't have to be adversaries.
Right. So for some reason they had trouble doing that, and okay, it helps me and it helps them, and it doesn't mean that it doesn't. You shouldn't be bean counting either, as to they owe me or this person owes me, and then you're not living in a community either.
Well, it's part of the idea of surviving. In the old days, we actually had to rely on each other. And of course, we had guns and we could help protect each other as well. But we relied on each other because there wasn't this idea you could go down to the supermarket and get a bunch of stuff. You had to rely on your neighbors. Everyone had their skills, their abilities.
Right. And if like I have chicken eggs, and then somebody else has wheat, and somebody else, has walnuts or something, and we could change at different times. Or somebody one time of the year has peaches, and if you don't give everybody the eggs, then why should they be helping you out? It isn't like you do tit for tat. It's or somebody they know is doing the best they can, and they had a broken leg, and so they couldn't do as much, and then somebody might help them. Like the famous thing about barn raisings. Somebody can't do that by themselves, so other people come help them because it gets reciprocated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wish that the world was like that. I've got all these projects that I need help with, and yet I've got all these skills that I can provide for other people. It's the way that it should be, and I think that this is the biggest psyop, is that they've created a situation where we're divided from one another and we're no longer community.
Like when I moved into my house, there's a old storage building, and that's what I was going to use for the chicken house. And a neighbor, elderly guy, very wise, saying what I need to do to get some 4x4s to strengthen up the bottom, because it didn't have a bottom, it was just sitting on concrete. And then we jacked it up and put the bottom under it, and then got a old telephone pole and chopped up into pieces. And he got his tractor to pull, and I put the rollers in front, and then when they come out the back, take those out and then make it turn, then pull it up the hill and got it in place. Yeah.
I can just see you engineering that. I love it when I hear about your chicken coop and how you've built this and that.
Yeah, we put the floor in too, this press board stuff, and could almost do it. It was with 2 4x8 sheets, but then there was a little bit left over here, some gaps here and there, and so he said that's all right. He got one and cut up into pieces and filled in the corner, so every single bit got used. And instead of having a whole another sheet, you have to get another sheet. Just got the leftover scraps and put them in.
I love doing that. I've got this project that I'm doing right now with my Airstream, and my whole thing is that I don't want to buy anything. I want to take what I've already got and see how I can use it. And it's amazing what you have around. I show people, my setup, and they go, "Wow, you've got a lot of stuff." And it's like, yeah, I didn't know I had all that. Bungees and whatever you need to use. It's fun.
Yeah, and or pieces that are left over that you can save to use for something else,
Mm-hmm.
and end up, kind of a pack rat. But something comes in handy. My neighbor is a good pack rat too, and he came over with, like, shingles came off my roof. He gave me his box of roof nails. And I used ones I needed and gave it back. Things like that. It's good rather than having to figure out what size I need to go get.
Well, this is probably the most important aspect of what we're talking about here from my perspective, because really what we're doing is we're looking at relationship. And I do think that that's why we're here on the earth, from my perspective. And the easiest thing to just dismiss is relationship. We can just, there's all sorts of excuses why we don't have to be interacting with one another. And I think that's kind of the world that we're in right now. And the way to fight that, or the way to come up against that, is to say, I am going to be involved with my neighbors. I'm not going to be pushing things down their throat. Let's just have a relationship first, and then gain each other's trust so that we can then have their ear.
Right, and they've told me how this community used to be when the kids were growing up. They said whoever's yard they're in, they're the ones who set the rules.
Precisely.
Yes. So they go over to something. A bunch of them were at their house, and it was dinner time. And you want dinner, okay? Have those kids for dinner.
And when the street lights go on, you come in.
Yep.
That's kind of. I have to tell a little bit of an anecdotal story, because a friend of mine who got me involved in computers in the early 80s in exchange for looking after her son, because I was writing and she thought I needed a computer, and she said, well, you've got these kids anyway, you can look after my son. And he used to come with all his toys and all the rest of it, and he was an only child, and I had all these children, and he was trying to dictate how things were going to work. And apparently
and
at home,
know how to share his toys.
Oh yeah, so it was interesting. There came a point where I said to him, okay, here's the threshold of my house. I said, whatever you do at your house, that's up to your parents to tell you what what the rules are. Because he would always say things like, well, I get to jump on the furniture, and I'd say, well, here the deal is this and this and this. And I said, if you can't share your toys, my kids are sharing with you, but if you can't, then you just put that on the shelf out here before you come through the door. And he would whine and complain about not being able to have his toys. And it was just such a simple thing. But he learned that you either share, but if you want to keep it private, like I said, I've got stuff that I don't want you to get into, so I put it away where you can't get at it. But I'm not going to bring it out and start playing with it, while you're here. I have to share it. So
yep.
The same rules apply to everybody.
You don't share it. You don't bring it out.
Right. So very simple. And his parents were just astounded, because he started to really grow up and say, I can handle it. I can handle these situations. And they said within a couple of weeks he changed completely. They used to have to lock him in his room at night. And I just said, oh, well, that's what they do with little babies,
Yeah, I like the story of how you when you talk about that are you a little baby? Then we got to treat you like a little baby.
Yeah, and now if you said that, it would be somehow shaming them. To me, it's just you gain a certain amount of independence as you get older, and you can handle responsibility. It's just that way.
Yeah. Like the idea of this gun control that we have to wait until they're 21 till they can buy these guns, because they're not old enough yet, and that was sort of the introduction of gun control. And my response to that would be, okay, I guess we should hold off the voting till they're 21.
Mm-hmm.
I bet things would change real fast if that were the case. That's a pretty large voting block that the anti-gun people depend on.
Yeah, and not just on a practical level, then don't let them join up in the army either till they're 21.
Yep. Yeah, if you think that they're too immature to handle responsibilities, don't give them any responsibilities.
Well, to me,
You
this
know,
is what character driven is, and that's kind of brings the whole thing together, because it's not about being a good person or not being a good person. It's about having a set of values and expressing them and then living by them and being willing to be judged by them. Um, and then if you
being
screw
honest.
up, you can say, I screwed up. But it's just this sense of being responsible for your own actions and the words that you're speaking, having integrity.
Yeah, and being consistent. I do think that would solve this gun thing. Those who are pushing for the age 21, if you say, okay, if you're saying they're not responsible to operate a gun, how can they be responsible to operate an automobile
Yep.
or vote or anything else? Wasn't that the big thing about I think it was in 1975, was it, or four, around there, when they lowered the voting age to 18, and because kids could go to war, why can't they vote? And that was a good point.
Mm-hmm.
If they're old enough to go to war and lose their life, why aren't they old enough to vote?
Yes, indeed. Well, it's all very convenient, and I think if we were to hold ourselves to a standard, then we would have the integrity to be able to
Yeah,
then pass that
be
along.
consistent.
Yeah, and instead of this thing, well, don't judge me. I don't mind being judged. If I've put out something and I've failed at that, then that's okay. What's the problem? You're learning.
What's so weird about this? You need to be 21 to buy this kind of gun. That it wouldn't affect anyone except for this Florida one, because what was the guy, 62 in Las Vegas, and
Something
the
like
one
that.
in Connecticut, they stole the mother's gun.
Mm-hmm.
This kid actually, if the legal system was working correctly and the Department of Education wasn't interfering, he wouldn't have been authorized to buy a gun either.
Mm-hmm.
It's that the school system didn't want the kids to have a police record, so if they do anything bad, you don't report them. So what if they brought guns to school? You don't report them, and the police aren't even supposed to make a record out of them, even if somebody calls the police on them.
Well, I have even a more, I think, poignant perspective on this, because I'm thinking about the march today and the kids that are there and the teacher that asked them to not to tell the other people what the real agenda was. We're going to go on false pretenses to Washington, D.C., and even though we don't have permits, we're going to go and do something that we haven't been given permission to do. And it's their big secret. And I'm thinking that's the kind of thing that creates the adults that are willing to go around the law, that are and these are the protesting guns.
To the kids that it's okay to not obey the law.
And so here they are going against the gun laws, and they're saying, and what they're doing is they're teaching those very kids that they can go around the laws that now exist and go get a gun. As far as I can see, it's open season on anything. If you don't obey the rules, you can do anything you want.
The ends justify the means.
Yeah. And what they should be teaching is integrity. If you don't believe in guns, then you shouldn't be taking other people's money to go to Washington, for one thing. Do what we had to do: raise some money and go. And don't take the money of people who have an agenda, because then you're under their thumb at that point.
The most important thing I would like to see come from this is, in every high school, have a chat with the students about, okay, let's define what problem we're going to solve. What is the problem, and what are the possible solutions to it? Okay, problem is kids get shot up at school. You don't like people getting shot up at school. Okay, now how are we going to go about solving that?
Mm-hmm.
And have an actual discussion. Do you think that would be possible, even without, I guess you have a teacher directing thinking, but if the kids were left to their own thinking on their own, and left it to like write an essay of all the different sides of it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the little bit that I've heard is like, we don't want to get shot up in our schools. Okay, so what are
It's
we
like
going to do about
somebody
it?
does.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
somebody does.
Yeah.
And what are possible solutions? Let's look at things that have worked and things that have not worked. Let's look at, issues. Where have most of the shoot 'em ups happened? The mass shootings. And then what do we have in common with those? And where do we not have mass shootings? And what is in common with those places?
Mm-hmm.
And have things always been like that? That's just current time. Now let's look over time, and there's lots of different issues they can think about instead of just immediately jumping to one conclusion.
Well, it's the same exact issue because they've been taught to have the answer, and just as with 9/11. And the part about critical thinking is you have to take the risk of being not part of the crowd and saying, hey, here's an idea. And I used to have staff, and I had this big piece of foolscap on the back of the door. It said problem, big line in the middle, possible solution. And because they'd always come to me with the problem, and I'd say, you must think I'm really smart because you could probably figure this out for yourself. And I'd say, even if the idea is not workable, it's the grain of an idea, and then we can work on that together. But if you're going to come to me with a problem, you have to fill out this other side of the equation with something. It has to have something in there before we address it. And it was amazing how people started solving problems for themselves. The
one obvious thing, and because it's getting too obvious, you wonder if somebody's going to jury rig something else. Another event. But the one obvious thing in common with all the shootings, mass shooting things, is they're gun-free zones.
Mm-hmm.
So what does that tell you? Let's make it not a gun-free zone and see what happens. But as long as it's a gun-free zone, I mean, just look at the logic behind it. Instead of why does the thinking go to let's take away guns?
Take a look at some of the other issues too, because there was clearly some problems behind the scenes, because that was not an unknown person to the FBI. So
right, and the fact that there's rules saying that we don't want a pipeline from school to prison, so therefore any school kid who acts up, let him go, let him loose, don't punish him. And so you have weird stuff happening. Discipline is an issue. Or lack of discipline.
Well, I think that really brings us back around to the idea that we need to take a disciplined approach to everything. And whether it's, we can't just throw out something like my neighbor is doing something that I don't like. We need to take responsibility and ownership of
What's the
things that
problem? Why is it a problem? And what are the possible solutions?
And how am I going to get involved in that? Exactly. So I would say that the people that are out in the audience that are having difficulties with talking to their friends about this or whatever, let's see how we can be of service to one another and help one another, and see what our motivations are for even wanting to share this information. Are we trying to make a better world? Are we trying to get people on side with us? Or are we really...
It's a bigger team or something, or get the in-crowd members increasing.
Yeah. Or are we trying to deepen our relationship? Because I know for me, what I want is to be able to speak to people on the same level, that we have the same basic understanding.
Instead of having to tippy-toe around certain topics.
Right.
Like the thing that I brought up initially when I first learned about this shooting business is, you think back what it was like for us. And if a kid was ostracized or acting up or something, people had been teasing him, and by lunchtime, somebody went and sat with him to make sure he was okay. It was just, human decency that we had. And like if a kid looked like a time bomb, it may be because he feels shunned by everybody. And maybe just put an arm around him and, I hope you don't get a sexual assault charges on you. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean, figuratively. Just be friendly to the person, and maybe they're not a time bomb anymore. Think of what it would be like if you were, everybody hated you. Everybody you ever knew now hated you. That'd be an awful feeling. And
Mm-hmm.
then, you feel like you get a caged animal and keep poking him with a stick. He has nothing to lose by lashing out. So if the animal doesn't, if you give him a safe place, you feel comfortable and worthy of being on the planet, maybe that's all that's needed. And this kid, yeah, it was a time bomb. Then he kicked him out of school, and his mother died or something. Yeah, there's plenty of problems there, and I bet you he was ostracized too. So
Mm-hmm.
maybe if we could remember those kinds of things for elementary school students instead of sorting them into this bin or that bin. You have this special ed class, that special class. You have this special, and everybody's getting privileges, and then these kids get labeled troublemaker.
Mm-hmm. And that
And
starts very early on. It starts in when they're in daycare. I had people working for me. Fortunately, I didn't have all of the credentials. I was just a parent that started this center. But it was really interesting because there would be a child that was crying there, and they would try all these different tactics with them. And I would pick up the child, and I'd say, this kid is here for 10 hours a day. This is their home for 10 hours a day. Sometimes they just need a hug. And it just didn't occur to these guys. It was almost trained out of them to think about these things.
is that I listened recently to a short Jordan Peterson video on feeding a kid. I don't know if you've heard that one. It was I
No.
guess the mother, her regular daycare person, not daycare, nanny or whatever, was sick and couldn't take care of the kid, and so the kid was getting passed around the neighborhood. Different people had take turns caring for the kid while the mom was working,
Mm-hmm.
and it came to their house, and she dropped him off on the porch, and the kid's just looking down at the ground, and she says, "Well, he probably won't eat all day, but that's fine. Don't worry about it." And Jordan Peterson was thinking, "That's not fine." This kid, I forgot how old it was, little toddler, and then he was trying to get the kid. He goes through this long explanation about he's trying to get the kid to eat, and like he's going to outlast the kid, trying to figure out which ways. Like if you tickle a kid, opens his mouth, okay, get the food in.
Right.
He's trying to solve that problem. And then finally, his wife, deals with the kid, or he goes out the door or something, comes back, and the kid's eating just fine. And the wife showed how she did it. That finally, the kid ate a bite, and she passed him on the head and praised him. He did a good job. And
Right.
then wait a minute, that was the first thing all day long that he did well, instead of everything being negative. And so now he was a proud eater. He could eat, and that was cool. And the mom came to pick him up, and they saw exactly where it was coming from. The kid is always getting criticized, around the clock, and something
Mm-hmm.
just that tiny makes all the difference. And I think we're losing that more and more.
Catch them doing something good. We
And then
seem to
praise
catch people doing things that are naughty. And that's the other thing about the neighbor too. Why not go over during another time when the kid isn't out there and say, it seems like you're pretty busy with your child. Is there something I can do to help? Or take a cake over or something. Like it's this judgmental side that seems to win out over the compassionate side. Then
Mm-hmm.
you've built up a relationship where if you do say something, they know that you're not just being that nosy neighbor. You're actually
Mm-hmm.
caring for them. So there's simple solutions to these problems,
But
but it's very,
it's all about community.
that's right. And treating people the way you want to be treated, having compassion. So it's a lot harder than just leaving people to their own devices. And I
And
think we can all
let kids
relate to
get their
this.
needs.
Yep. Yeah. We, it's great to have discipline, and we've talked about that as well, but you have to create an atmosphere of trust. and love
Yep.
and protect first.
And I
So,
think a lot of these kids, of course, there's one thing I'm not familiar with, but I know is another component. Like a kid born to a mother who was on drugs at the
mhm.
time through the pregnancy. I understand that messes a kid up, and then they put him in foster care or whatever and get him adopted out, and then he's a problem after that. Or ones that even if that biologically isn't messed up, then Child Protective Services gets a kid off of from no reason at all, no good reason at all, just based on a vengeful rumor, and takes the kid away from mom, and then it messes up that relationship. I
Yep.
think most of the time that Child Protective Services is probably does more harm than good. I'm just going to guess. It's safe to guess over half the time, but I might say 95%. But I don't have data on that. It's just a hunch because of all the messed up cases. And I think it's probably pretty easy to tell. But I think those people want to make their jobs feel like they're doing something useful.
Mhm.
But if a parent does beat up a kid and is in risk of causing brain damage or something, I don't know how you read that. But don't you have neighbors that would understand that better and be able to talk with the mother, or have some kind of a community deal? Like if the mother's coming unglued, is likely to take it out on the kid. Would a neighbor know that the person was coming unglued and go over to help out?
Well, we've created a culture that's very, very difficult for parents because it's meant to be a community. And that was one of the reasons that I had a drop in full-time, part-time childcare center, and it was the only one where the parents could just drop them off for an hour, go and negotiate a mortgage or go out for lunch with their
Grocery
friends.
shop.
And I used to have mums come in all the time, usually the mums, and they would be in tears and they'd say, I don't know what I would do if you weren't here. And the thing is, I noticed it when my mom died because, I just want to go to the doctor and I'd leave my mom with the kids and, you know, half an hour away. And it seemed such a simple thing, but it's very, very complicated if you don't live in community.
Yeah, you raised an excellent point there, and why things get haywire. Some are justifiably haywire and some are unnecessarily haywire, but it is about community there. And I do think raising children is intended to be a group thing. Kids raise each other. One room schoolhouse type deal.
Mm-hmm.
Or like we talked about how my neighborhood was when the previous generation was growing up. Kids would play at this person's house or that person's house, and different. Each yard had its rules, and kids playing together, they learn to respect because of that concept of fair play. If one's always beating out the other one doesn't want to play.
Well, and the
So
parents get a break too. For a mom, sometimes they just need to go and have a nap. Maybe they've been up all night. There's
mhm.
and the other moms would know that. Now it would be terrible for somebody to say that they went and had a nap in the afternoon. Usually they're at work. It's too much. And I remember my mother-in-law saying this to me because she said, "Oh, I just felt for you up in that." I used to live in a house on a hill, and my 4 kids. And she said, "You're all alone up there." And I used to feel so sorry for you. And I thought, oh, I just love that she said that because she really understands. Because she lived in a place where she could leave her kids next door with her sister, I think. I think it was, they all lived
So,
close to each other.
if
You know,
a mother needs a timeout, they can park the kid next door.
or even to go grocery shopping, like this idea of having the kids in the car and then you're going to have the CPS people.
Or
Well,
they have the grocery basket, and then they're squawking and screaming, and it's stressful
yeah,
having
and you've
to.
got babies and you got to take them out of the car seat and you got to, because you're running in for sex. So, I knew it was wrong, but I would do it. I'd go into the post office or come back out. But, people would report me. Just,
or if it's too bad there isn't like somebody else who's getting ready to pull out of the parking lot said, I'll wait and watch your kid.
well, this is the thing,
You
you
can't
know,
do that anymore, though. But
the older guys,
yeah,
like the guy that
they
helped you
leave
with your
the kid.
chicken coop, they're the ones that are helpful. Like if I have my truck hood open, you know, the front open, there's always a guy that's about 80 that comes along and says, "Can I help you?" You know, the rest of them are whipping by. But there is just this sense of community that they have as well. You know, they see
How do we bring it back, or do we? You know, I think that's part of the agenda is to, yeah, you destroy every institution, family, marriage, school, you know, even university. Everything's getting destroyed for a reason.
I think I have an answer to that because I look at people who are in the audience here, whatever, and you know, I would say this too. I have a friend that I've been trying to talk to, and I've learned that my first responsibility is to be a good partner if I'm a wife, or good mom if that's what I'm doing, good friend, and when we start to really take that responsibility seriously, I think that we will change things because you're going to affect a lot of people. If you go back to your wife or your child and say, how are you doing today? Is there something I can do to help? You know, it it changes the whole atmosphere because there can be a lot of tension when they know that you have an agenda that you're just waiting to launch in with your, you know, red pilling. And I've had to discipline myself, you know, with my friend. I gave him the book and he said, you know, I'll read it, I promise. And he keeps saying that. And I never mention it. I haven't mentioned it once since he took it. And he's the one that says it to me, you know, and I just ask him how he's doing and what he's been doing. Try to create relationship with people that are, you know, things that are authentic, and treat them the way you want to be treated.
Yep. And that's the way it used to be. I'm going back to, like, you know, fourth and fifth grade where a kid got teased, and by lunchtime somebody was sitting with him to make sure he's okay, make sure that he didn't get over teased.
Yep.
And it didn't need to be best friends, but to be respectful and let them know they're still okay in the class. They're not, you know. But I think also there's a problem with the internet, the anonymity thing, and the horrible stuff that goes on with, like, making secret videos of some girl in the class and then exposing it online. And very humiliating. And that's there's a lot of you know, personally destructive things that go on with that. Like, why would somebody do a thing like that?
Well, when we look back at old videos or movies where they had people drinking and driving, we now go, that wasn't acceptable. And that was because those were not part of the in crowd anymore. We have to make it unacceptable for people to be bad-mouthing each other and tolerating that kind of behavior too.
That takes discipline, and there isn't any.
Well, we have the capacity for it.
Right. And that's what I think is needed from the get-go. And what I would like to see is something like, if a kid you know, misbehaves in class, okay, he gets sent down to the detention hall. You know, first time you say no, don't do that, and then, you know, it comes to a point where he goes down to the detention hall and has to be down there and under supervised, you know, study hall, so to speak. And if that doesn't work, and it's still getting more and more out of hand for there, you send them to a residential school where they learn discipline. Like, if you want to, you know, you got to feed the cows and feed this and that. And if it doesn't get fed, then you lose other privileges. But if
you have a different idea of residential school. I just want to clear that up.
Oh yeah, it's not like the residential, but one where there's supervision, like, and and they have a school there too where the kid, you know, if they want to do something, if they do their chores well, then they get to do it. and so there's a cause and effect, and because I think that there's not much of that in some homes. And how's a kid to learn that? And it's the problem for our culture if they don't.
Well,
And
one of my
sometimes
solutions.
I'm sorry, it's like a
Sorry.
you know, mother who has a problem kid, and she's, you know, juggling all her time, you know, doing jobs here and there to make ends meet. How does she, if she's not very good at mothering? The right now the alternative is the kid gets taken in with gangs or who knows what.
I have a solution. I think
What's
that
that?
there have been studies that have done that have said that when children have both a man and a woman in their life, they
Mm-hmm.
succeed quite well. And I think that
Because
men need to
they
step
have
up to the
yes,
plate
right.
because we've been talking about moms here and the
Mm-hmm.
responsibilities they have. It can only go so far, and often kids do get taken away from moms. And I get that, but why not have some men, whether they're grandpas or uncles or whatever they are, whatever role they play in the community, take back the ownership and stop with this whole sexual abuse thing and all the other stuff that's keeping them afraid to get involved with kids, and just start to normalize normal behavior again. Because I think this whole idea of sexual abuse is also another way of keeping men out of the lives of children. I know that there's a lot of perversion. I absolutely do. But most people, men and women, are decent human beings. Women need support. You know, we need to
Yeah,
step
I was
in.
just thinking, I guess, of a band-aid, immediate thing. If the mother can't raise the kid and there's nobody else
Hmm.
around, the kid needs, you know, a disciplined household kind of thing. And if there's some kind of a group type thing, maybe it's run by the men or whatnot that you know, can supervise the kids. Because if a kid isn't supervised and doesn't learn discipline, they're heading off the rails.
What they need, I think, is to get back into playing with, in a community. I think it's great to discipline, but I think too that they need to know that they're loved, that they're appreciated,
Well, I
and
mean,
for.
what I mean by discipline, it's not you know, negative. It's
Yeah.
like you know, like you go out and feed the chickens, and that's fun. It's something you need to do every day. You have chores, you know,
Hmm.
responsibility. Maybe that's where I need is responsibility
Oh,
there,
sure.
and there's also playing that they can do. You know, this group establishment, whatever it is, but and maybe you got a point there with the fathers who weren't involved with the mother can be involved, you know, like playing ball with the boys there or girls or whatever. You know,
Yeah,
it's
they've just shown studies that have actually proven that young men, particularly, and young women as well, but particularly the men that have a bonded relationship with an older man where they get to play and go fishing and that sort of thing, very rarely have these problems. And so if we look at
yeah.
the root of the problem, maybe, and
That's why I guess what I had in mind is, well, actually what I was picturing is, remember, I don't know if you looked much into Temple Grandin, who
yeah, I love her.
who went to one of those, what I call it, a residential school,
Hmm.
where and she, you know, if she was good, she got to ride the horse. If she slugged her classmates, then she lost horse riding privileges and had, you know, other responsibilities to do of feeding chickens or whatever else. They also had playthings to do, but the having the discipline, that what I mean by discipline is like, you know, responsibility kind of thing, not just
Hmm.
not like as in spanking. You know, and what I mean by is having more of a structured um, cause and effect environment, and
Hmm.
that it seems like that kind of thing. If the parent situation isn't working well, you know, okay, and if the kid, you know, gets their act together, but how do you keep them from forming gangs and going that route?
Well, I think one of the things is that we need to change the school so that we don't have 3,000 kids in one school. And somewhat like, the way that we build buildings, maybe we could have these
Community
little
school.
enclaves. Maybe you do have a big school, but you're breaking it down into smaller groups so that you get to know the kids.
Yep,
And
you're not anonymous anymore.
yes, I think that's one of the biggest problems with the schools, and it would help teaching, would help everything if we broke it down and had a smaller school idea, like you said, the one-room schoolhouse. It's I think all of these are just
Everything we're
common
talking
sense.
about is about the need for community, and that's what is. It seems like it's being systematically destroyed.
Yep.
And
And it's something we can fix. You know, in my own way, I tried to fix it as much as I could, you know, by having, I mean, a child care center was not my thing. I was a writer, photographer, you know, media
but I can
person.
see if I had a kid and it needed to do something, having some place to go park the kid, for a couple of hours, that's reliable. It would be a godsend.
And I had to fight for that because the rules didn't allow for it. And it was a big deal to come against the powers that be because they had these very specific rules about how long, you know, you had to keep your kid there for a whole month or else go to nursery school. You couldn't do an hour at a time. And I had to fight for that. And I still have, you know, so
Because
there's some.
what happens if there's a mother who's really stressed out and she's going to, tear her kid apart if she has to spend another minute with it? Well, she can go, maybe it's a daycare kind of like place like that where she can go park the kid for a couple of hours while she cools off. Maybe that would
Exactly.
Would help.
And we didn't judge where they went. You know, they could go to the beach if they wanted to. We don't care. It was just, and
they needed to go out.
They needed to
do something by themselves. They need to be by themselves.
You just need to, and a lot of the other parents would say, well, you should have a job because then you can have an hour of lunch by yourself. So it's this other, don't be at home with your kids.
If you have a single mother who wants to go take out her frustrations out at the gym, what does she do with the kid?
Precisely. That was my idea as well. And it was very successful. It became quite a big deal. And I ended up not being a writer anymore. I had all these staff and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And,
It's such a nice idea. I wish there is more, prevalent. Or even having like a one-room schoolhouse kind of thing, and kids of different ages are there and could, be showing another kid how to read or something.
I did that too. I started a school. The problem with that is, again, there's all these rules, and they make the kids be segregated, because I wanted it to be a mastery system where the kids would master the information and move on at their own rate.
But one kid showing another kid how to read helps the first kid. Or do math problems or whatever.
That was the vision. But again, if you want funding, then it's all very well if you have this idea, but then you have these practical things like you need to pay people and that sort of thing. And the government, if you get involved with them in our area, you have to have a certain curriculum, and it's very divided age-wise, and it's all about teachers teaching, not kids helping. It's all part of the indoctrination. So, and outcomes. I just thought that was bizarre.
Yeah, the stupid check boxes rather than I think of mentally Little House on the Prairie type environment, where kids they'd take time off from doing their chores to go to school, so it better have been worthwhile. They're not just going there for fiddling an aging bin. And I understand that's actually why there's the summers off, so they could help with the farming.
Right. Yes. Well, I knew that too. When I was in the lower grades, I lived in an area where farming was important, and we had a course called Enterprise, and we went out to the farmers' fields and we learned about farming. And it was the closest I came to it, but Enterprise. That's what we needed in our life, was a little bit more enterprise, and I think it's a great course.
So does anybody in the chat room have any good bombshell ideas about changing things around?
They're being very patient about just listening to us banty back and forth. Is that what you call it?
Yeah, the problem is that, though, that if this is deliberately being set up, it's hard for one or two people to derail it.
Yes.
Unless everybody figures out that what kind of a world do we want?
Precisely.
And stop to think about that more rather than, well, I guess we have to have armed guards in every classroom, not realizing that isn't necessarily what the problem is. That might help with the immediate thing, or I think the idea of not knowing if somebody has a gun or not. In other words, not making it a gun-free zone helps a lot. But figuring out what the actual cause is of it, that's just like a Band-Aid. And with this kid in Florida, it's like he's off the rails. Everyone knows he is, but then they just turn him loose because not my job.
Well, I think it's a perspective that maybe we have as women. When you look at the front of your book and people talk about space beams, they don't even seem to look at the part about free energy. And to me, that's the big deal here. It's either you can annihilate the entire world, perhaps for second or third time, who knows, or we can use it for good. And imagine if we had free energy, what would the world look like then? For me, that's
this always, I found curious is Nikola Tesla and Ed Leedskalnin came from sort of the same longitudinal line. One was from Latvia and one was Serbia, and at about the same time. And they both understood this weird technology. One was, more outgoing than the other, set their sights on bigger things, but they still were aware of this. And why didn't it didn't come in plain sight? And Ed Leedskalnin especially illustrates this. I think Tesla stated it that if he gave free energy to the world, it would be used for evil. He didn't want that to happen. Well, been there, done that, so that's not a risk anymore. but like Ed Leedskalnin, I think it was brought up with respect for the technology. He had to earn that respect. And if you didn't, so you didn't share it with somebody unless they knew what, like, you don't just show it off. So, like, when he'd be working on something, he would have a second sense about him. If there's some neighborhood kids around, he'd just stop working.
Right.
So he wasn't going to disclose this because of a respect for the technology. And I see that as analogous to leaving a gun cabinet unlocked. You don't do that unless everybody in the house knows what a gun is and what it can do, and that there's no undo button. So, if you know what a gun can do, you have a gun and you keep it under, in a safe place. But if you don't know that, you shouldn't have one. And I think the similar thing is with this technology. And I think Ed Leedskalnin and Nikola Tesla had that understanding. And I'm curious about if there's any others from around that time. But they knew not to flaunt it.
Well, and for all we know, there are lots of people that still have that technology, but they just haven't brought it forward because they've seen what can be done with it.
Yeah. Whoops, there goes the planet. Oops.
Well, I wonder, too, if Tesla, he didn't sell out to the big guys because he wanted it to be free, and he saw that they were trying to create a grid. And I think he could see the writing on the wall, too, with the grid idea, because that was going to be a weaponized option as well.
Well, just a lot of things that he wasn't going to play ball with. He could outsmart him, but he didn't want to become one of them, and he didn't want to use it for leverage on somebody to see if he could outmaneuver somebody. He just wanted to do science, do engineering, and not like, what can you hold over on the next guy and manipulate this person with that. I don't think he was interested in that kind of thing.
An unusual person. It's I think that's the thing that's at the heart of all of this, is that you're either looking at it as a weapon or you're looking at it as a way of peace, which when I think about technology and how it can be used both ways, certainly this is one of the biggest deals. If we...
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I just say if we had free energy from this technology, just like with Ponds and Fleischmann, then you can see why the bad guys are sort of encroaching and saying, no, we don't want them to know.
Yeah, he controls energy, controls the people. Mm-hmm. But he who controls their perception controls everything. Mm-hmm. So you don't, both of those things you want to control. One's more important than the other one. Perception management is more important than anything. It doesn't matter what reality is if your perceptions get monkeyed with. And I guess a perfect example of that is thermite. Oh, we have thermite evidence. We can go hang somebody. It doesn't matter if there's any evidence for anything or not. You just need to say it, and then they run with it because they think it's something. You know, it's the perception of it. That even though the reality of it doesn't pan out. So it doesn't, you know, the whole idea of it, but they get everybody to focus on whether or not there's thermite there. But what does thermite do? It isn't what happened to the buildings. It's because their perception was getting managed. That's more important than the actual physical evidence business. Mm-hmm. And so that's something for everyone to, you know, keep note of, is having, when somebody else starts, you know, monkeying with your perception, trying to convince you of something, you know, try to do it as freely as you can to think of things and of what you know that you know that you know. But as for like free energy and all that, it's, you know, it's a nice idea, but if perception is being managed, ain't going to happen. Also, it's not going to work. I mean, it's the perception management issue, I think, is trumps everything. Mm-hmm. And that's actually what is the whole thing about the gun march business. It was a perception management exercise.
Yes. Well, this is, I guess, what I was saying about the T-shirts and the co-opting of that whole, you know, that whole event. You know, you look at all of the different elements of that and you realize that it's just a Hitler youth movement. It's just a different version of it. You know,
that CNN thing right afterwards, the town hall thing. It was so orchestrated and managed.
Oh, it all is. It's all part of the plan. I mean, they tell you they're part of the Mockingbird media, and you know that's a CIA plan. You know, I won't get into all of that. It's just that's pure evidence.
But you know, if any kind of a, you know, public forum where someone has to submit their questions ahead of time, bogus. If you really want real questions, you should just have people be able to walk up to the microphone and read their questions.
Well, anything that's controlled, I should say.
Right.
That's cold and controlled. Yeah, if the message is controlled in any way, then that's what we have to come up against, and that's where you're going to get yourself into some trouble, because you can imagine that one parent that says, "I'm not going to allow my child to go because of this and that child is going to have to deal with that too, you know."
They're going to be mad at their mother for not letting go, if that was what I don't know that story, but...
Well, they get a free trip to Washington, D.C., and it's just that they have to...
Who's funding that?
The Gifford, Gabby Gifford, her association is, from what
money into it, that's where the money gets spent?
Well, they're paying for the trip, they're paying for the hotel, they're paying for the actual seats on the plane.
Where the money come from, the Gabby Gifford thing, but people who donated money to Gabby Gifford, they didn't get to choose how their money was getting spent.
No, but unfortunately, if you do that, if you donate to a foundation, as long as they're using it for the intended purpose, then, you know, they get to decide that sort of thing. And the rule was that they had to wear the T-shirts from the time that they left their house to the time they came home. And
somebody thought that was or I bet you somebody else funding it, but that getting it associated with Gabby Gifford, they thought that would be a winning political maneuver.
Just looking it up to see something about the Giffords.
But what needs to be shown is that it's not the guns killing. And
yeah, well,
like there's a school shooting deal that happened locally here that where the kid first stole his dad's pickup truck after he shot his dad. He went down, tried to mow the fence down with the pickup truck, and then he was going to mow down the playground, the kids out in the playground. Well, he was not very bright, I guess, and got the truck stuck in the fence. And then went to plan B and then pulls out the gun and then tries to shoot somebody. But he shot a couple, but then went to shoot the teacher and the thing jammed. And he had another problem. And by then somebody was jumping on top of him, tackling him. But, there's people who mow people down with their vehicles. Guns didn't make them do that. It's just that they want to act out.
Well, the other thing is that... Sorry, Gabby was hit in a shopping center, not at a school. So, are we going to shut down?
But still, it was shot by somebody who owns a gun. I think that they're just drawing that parallel. But if the guns weren't around, she wouldn't have been shot. No, they could have mowed her down with a vehicle. There's been people who've mowed people down sidewalks in vehicles, and actually, that's probably easier to do than a gun. If you found a gun-free zones, you can, nobody's going to stop your vehicle. So you take off and mow down a bunch of people if that's what you're into. So it's not the gun that's doing it; it's the idiot who's going berserk, or the troubled person, or whatever you want to call them.
On the screen, I have the Giffords org, and their mandate seems to be, to fight gun violence. It says the courage to fight gun violence. That's their motto. So apparently it takes courage to do this.
That's a psyop.
A total psyop. Well, I know it's a psyop because of all the rules.
The courage to discuss what the real problem is.
Yes.
I think that is a good comeback for that. What about the courage to determine what the real problem is?
Start a foundation. Apparently the first thing you see on the page, if you can see it on the screen, it's big donate button and, email address and join the fight. They don't even mention what they're about.
Sign up with the in crowd.
Yeah. Well, the thing that bothers me the most about this is that there is, a price to be paid for getting a free trip. So basically the kids have been enlisted by the school to represent the Gifford Association or organization, whatever they are. And that's where I would get up as a parent and I would just say, no, my kid's not going. They're not wearing the T-shirt. If they want to go on their own for their own purposes, they can pay their way for one thing, so they're not beholden to anybody.
So they're not hired help.
Well, this is all they are, and the people don't see it.
Hired. That's really scary. Yeah, kids pull it at the heartstrings, so they're going to do kids, but. I like to say, have the courage to discuss what the real problem is. You can't solve a problem until you define it. So have the courage to define what the problem is.
Yes. Well, I think this is something that we need to be aware of. I think we could probably talk about this on another show. We're probably going to wrap up things.
Yeah.
But
I think it's important to not be, remember how magic tricks are done to get you to assume the wrong problem so you can't solve it.
Yeah.
And this thing, have the courage to whatever, that's causing you to assume what the problem is so you don't ever solve the real problem.
Yep. there's a lot of things about this, and I'm encouraging people to take a look at the article. I'll put it up on the website. Um, just how, they basically said, don't tell anybody else. This is off the record, but it was all recorded. And they said, we don't have permits, but we're going to do this anyway. And they're telling all the parents and
why didn't they
the
bother
people
to
in
get
the room.
permit?
Well, because of Trump.
Huh?
No, they didn't. They didn't apply, I guess, in time, or there was some sort of problem.
You have a
But
lot of money to buy T-shirts for everybody to fly them up there.
Yep.
It's just a lack of foresight.
They
They
got the
wouldn't
hotel
dare
rooms.
give us a problem for going without a
It's
permit.
it's a talking point. It's an ability to say, Trump wanted to shut this thing down. It's a psyop.
Yes. If you don't have right, so don't talk about the lack of permit, and so Trump's just trying to stop us.
Yeah, yeah. We weren't able to. Yeah, we got stopped, and so they're just going to storm the White House. It's a really good idea to just scare the hell out of people. Around the. That's what we want to do, because we want to stop gun violence.
That was happening today.
Yes, I'll be curious to see what the tweeting and such is all about.
Wait a minute. Let's forget about the gun part. We need to stand up against violence. Storming the White House is violence.
Well, this is exactly what I'm thinking. What are they teaching these kids? They're going on this whole ridiculous
It's a
trip.
what do you call it? Religious war.
There you go. Absolutely. Yet, if you were to say that this was, you're going to march on Washington for, Martin Luther King Day or something, you probably wouldn't be allowed to, because it's too, it's too controversial.
They try to use dirty tricks to for leverage. I bet you they did not want a permit, so that they could.
You got it. Yeah, that's my thinking on this. So what
you
I just see all of this happening all around us, and it's certainly not 9/11, but it's a psyop. And I saw it for what it was, and it's very, very frustrating, because I don't know what we can do about that except to expose it. So I'm exposing it here.
Rules are for a reason. Well, it's the same thing as like California, not having this what do you call it, sanctuary city business. So if it's okay to break the law if you are in California.
Yeah, you're special. The special people get to do whatever they need to do to push their agenda. And as soon as we start feeling that way, then we are really breaking down our society, because we're saying that the other person is intrinsically wrong and we're intrinsically right.
Well, like there are people who immigrate to the U.S. and they go through the right channels and they jump through the hoops and all that. Why are they punished? Financially, it costs them to do that. Whereas, if you do it illegally, you get even more goodies.
I just brought up one of the stories that I noticed. They flew on the Patriots plane. Is that maybe the football team? Yeah, the Patriots.
I wonder how much that cost to rent.
Oh, they got given that as a freebie. So now we've got team owners that are getting involved with the whole thing. So now ostensibly,
sports teams playing politics.
Precisely. Robert Kraft lent out the New England Patriots team plane so that they could. Yeah, it's a whole psyop, folks. I'm putting it out there. Take a look and see what part of this is.
Yeah, the fact that they got a headline with that on it, that shows it right there. Didn't get shut down.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And if we want to have the politicization of football teams, there's another way to do it. They're being used left and right.
Did you hear about the teacher who said, wait a minute, if the kids were getting out of school to go to protest guns or something, the teacher said, well, what about would we get time off to go protest abortion? And we're just asking that question. She got put on leave.
Oh, I'm sure it's offensive even to talk about here on YouTube. It's I've always been pro-life, and I guess you can
Well,
call
if they're
that what you
pro-life
want.
and
I
they're
just
saying that that's what they don't want to, they're against death of getting shot. Well, let's talk about other pro-life things.
exactly. Boy, are we ever getting politically incorrect right now? Because you're not even really supposed to be talking about this stuff, and yet, or if you do go to Washington, you go to support a woman's right to choose, which the woman has the right to choose already. It's just what are the choices? What are they being handed as far as the medical science is concerned? That's what I just like to
the right to
put the
choose,
evidence out there.
That right to choose business. It's like, okay, uh, Hillary Clinton was saying it's because you voted for Trump, you weren't making the right choice. Well, don't we have the right to choose? That we're pro-choice, choose who to vote for, or because the husband told him to vote a certain way, whatever. But isn't it about choice? Pro-choice has been used as anti-abortion or for abortion or whatever, and it should be about choice. Is it about choice or isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So if we get to choose, why don't we get to choose? No, it's just like it's still, everything has been co-opted.
The best way to deal with Americans and people who are wanting to have free choice is to make them think that they have a choice, and to just slowly kind of move them over to your way of thinking. And that's unfortunately what's been happening over the years. And I think 9/11 was a huge example of how that can happen to a whole nation of people.
Think they're part of it is, the
patriotic.
Yeah, having all the spy cameras.
Yeah, we need that. Yeah, I wonder if these guys had, if they were scared to fly, they could have been hijacked. You never know.
Oh yeah, well, no, they wouldn't get hijacked because they're on this other list. Only certain ones get hijacked. I'm sorry.
This is another subject that we can talk about sometime, because I find this quite interesting. Okay, I guess folks are probably going off to do their other things, and I really appreciate them joining us today and indulging us with our...
It'd be nice to get information back from them on what they think of defining what the problem is in order to find what the solution is.
Yes, I think that would be...
Get people to encourage people to do that. First, define a problem before you can solve it, instead of assuming a solution to what, Mm-hmm. Taking away guns is the solution to what problem?
And just to wrap up, because of course I always have questions and I can't resist, but why do you think we need to figure out 9/11? What's the point? I mean, that was 16, 17 years ago.
No, because it's so physically, blatantly obvious that of how people are hoodwinked, and let's figure out how they're hoodwinked, and so we don't get hoodwinked again. And with regards to so much stuff, it becomes like the fact that you look at the cover of the book. Once you figure it out, you go, my gosh, it was right in front of our face. Why didn't we see it? Okay, what else it's right in front of our faces we don't see?
Exactly.
Does that make sense?
That makes total sense to me, and it really helps us when we can kind of get through that barrier of understanding that things are not as they seemed. Once we can get through that barrier, we start to see it.
Right.
Well, thank you so much for taking all this time and sharing.
Thanks for doing it.
Happy to do so. Okay, I'm going to say goodbye to people, and I'm going to end the stream with our lovely thing. My extra. I'm going to call this my extra. Okay, bye, folks.
One of the initial steps of the military Psyop program is directed toward the hostland military establishment itself. Since the military represents the government to the populace, their actions and attitudes can do much to create a favorable image of that government in the minds of the people. A soldier's attitude goes a long way toward implementing an effective military Psyop program. Among the support elements needed are the light mobile printing team with its printing and editorial shelters. Also needed is a radio team to support existing radio stations, particularly in the back country. An audiovisual vehicle will help to increase the effectiveness of face-to-face communications. And a loudspeaker team will support tactical operations.